Location, Congaree National Park, South Carolina. Date, September 14th, 2018. The morning air in Congaree hung thick enough to drink. Tyler Chambers had worked in the South Carolina Lowcountry long enough to know the difference between regular September humidity and the particular heaviness that preceded a serious storm. This was the latter. He stood on the porch of the ranger station, coffee mug in hand, watching the way the cypress trees stood absolutely motionless, despite the pressure building in the atmosphere. No wind, no bird calls yet. Just the dense, waiting quality of air that had nowhere to go. The coffee was too hot, bitter from sitting on the burner too long, but Tyler barely noticed. He was focused on the tree line, on the way the Spanish moss hung straight down, like gray curtains frozen mid-performance. Normally the moss swayed even in the slightest breeze, creating that ghostly movement that gave these southern swamps their haunted reputation. But this morning, nothing moved. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath. He checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. The sun had been up for nearly an hour, but the canopy was so thick here that dawn took its time filtering down to the boardwalks and trails. Even now, with full daylight above the trees, the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight. Tyler had been a ranger at Congaree for 6 years, and he still found something unsettling about how dark it stayed beneath those ancient trees, how the Blackwater swamps seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. But unsettling in a beautiful way, he'd always thought. The kind of place that reminded you humans were visitors here, not owners. The station thermometer read 81 degrees Fahrenheit, and it wasn't even 7 in the morning yet. By afternoon, it would push into the low 90s, and that was before factoring in the humidity that sat on your chest like a physical weight. Tyler had grown up in Columbia, thought he understood southern heat, but Congaree was different. The moisture here didn't just sit in the air. It seemed to rise from the ground itself, from the countless pools and channels and swamps that made up more of the park than actual dry land. On mornings like this, the whole place felt like a terrarium, sealed and waiting. He finished his coffee, grimacing at the last bitter swallow, and went back inside to check the radio. The station was small, just him on duty until Emma arrived at 9. Weekday mornings in mid-September were quiet. The summer tourist rush had ended weeks ago, school was back in session across the state, and the serious hikers who came for the primitive campsites wouldn't start showing up in numbers until October, when the heat finally broke and the mosquitoes died back. This was the lull, the in-between time when Congaree belonged to its permanent residents again. The alligators, the water moccasins, the wild pigs, and whatever else lived in the deep places where the rangers rarely went. Tyler sat down at the desk that had been old when he'd started working here and pulled the radio closer. The thing was practically an antique, but it worked, and that was what mattered. Congaree Station, this is Tyler. Radio check. He released the button and waited through the static. 2 seconds. 3. Then Emma's voice came through, crisp and clear despite being transmitted from her apartment 15 miles away. Read you loud and clear, Tyler. How's it looking out there? Calm before the storm. You seeing the forecast? Yeah, I've been watching it since yesterday. Weather Service updated it about an hour ago. Still saying line of severe cells moving in around 3-4 o'clock. Could get nasty. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Possible flash flooding in low-lying areas. Tyler looked at the wall map behind him, at all the blue areas indicating wetlands and floodplains. Low-lying areas. That was half the park. We're supposed to close the boardwalk loop if lightning gets close. That's the protocol. Honestly, we should probably close everything by 2. Give people time to get out before it hits. You want me to update the website? Yeah, do that. Put out an alert. Park closing at 2 p.m. due to severe weather. All visitors must be off trails by then. He paused, thinking. What about overnight campers? Got any early visitors I should know about? Let me check the permit system. There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. Okay, looks like we've got one overnight camper checked in yesterday afternoon. Solo hiker, female, backcountry permit for the Kingsnake Trail area. Should be hiking out this morning. Tyler pulled over the paper log and uncapped a pen. He preferred keeping physical records as well as digital ones. Too many times he'd seen computer systems crash right when you needed them most. Got a name? Scarlett, hold on. Let me pull up the full permit. Scarlett Morrison, 24 years old, listed her address as Charleston. She put down her exit time as noon today. All right, I'll keep an ear out. Might do a run up to the Kingsnake trailhead later this morning. Make sure her car's gone before the storm comes in. Sounds good. You want me to try calling her? She listed a cell number on the permit. Tyler thought about that. Solo hikers sometimes reacted badly to check-in calls. Felt like it was Ranger Service being overprotective or implying they weren't competent. But with a major storm coming, yeah, give it a try. Just a courtesy heads up about the weather. If she doesn't answer, no big deal. She's probably already breaking camp. Will do. I'll be in at 9. Stay dry out there. You too. Tyler out. He set down the radio and looked at the name he'd written. Scarlett Morrison, Charleston. The Kingsnake Trail wasn't one of the popular routes. It looped through some of the wettest sections of the park, required waterproof boots even in the driest season, and offered none of the boardwalk amenities that made Congaree accessible to casual visitors. People who hiked Kingsnake were usually experienced, usually alone, and usually there because they wanted to be somewhere truly remote. The kind of people who knew what they were doing. Usually, Tyler stood and stretched, feeling his back pop. He'd slept badly last night, kept waking up for no reason he could name. Just a vague sense of unease that had followed him into dreams he couldn't quite remember. Probably just the pressure system messing with his head. Barometric changes did that sometimes, made people feel off even when nothing was actually wrong. He spent the next hour doing the routine work that filled ranger mornings, checking the trail register at the main entrance, responding to an email from a school group planning a visit next week, replacing a broken hinge on the information kiosk out front. Small tasks, but they added up. The whole job was like that. Hours of mundane maintenance punctuated by occasional moments of crisis. Lost hikers, medical emergencies, the rare alligator that got too comfortable around humans and had to be relocated. In 6 years, Tyler had dealt with all of those and more. But he'd never had a visitor simply vanish. Not without a trace. Not without any logical explanation. Not yet. By 8:30, the humidity had climbed to the point where his uniform shirt stuck to his back, just from walking to his truck. The sky remained that peculiar flat gray that promised violence later, but gave nothing away now. No dark thunderheads yet. No obvious storm front. Just an oppressive blanket of cloud that seemed to press down on the forest. Tyler climbed into the truck, started the engine, and headed toward the Kingsnake trailhead. Just a feeling, he told himself. Just that low-grade instinct you developed after enough years in wilderness work. Solo camper, storm coming, and that particular quality to the morning that made the back of his neck itch. The drive took 15 minutes on the gravel service road that wound through the park's eastern section. Tyler passed the turnoff for the boardwalk loop, empty at this early hour, and continued deeper into the less traveled areas. Out here, the forest pressed close to the road, tupelo and cypress and water oak, forming walls of green and brown on either side. A white-tailed deer bolted across the road about 50 yards ahead. Tyler caught just a flash of its flagtail before it vanished into the undergrowth. The parking area for the Kingsnake trailhead was barely more than a widened shoulder, space for maybe 3 vehicles. Scarlett Morrison's car was still there. A blue Honda Civic, maybe 10 years old, with a Charleston College parking permit hanging from the rearview mirror and a bumper sticker that read, "Not all who wander are lost." The hood was cool to the touch when Tyler laid his palm on it. Engine hadn't been running for hours. He checked his watch. 8:52 a.m. She'd listed noon as her exit time, so this wasn't concerning yet. Plenty of hikers slept in after a night under the stars, took their time breaking camp, stopped to photograph birds or interesting fungi. Tyler had been on enough searches to know that 90% of missing hikers showed up perfectly fine with some story about losing track of time or deciding to extend their trip. But as he stood there in the parking area, he noticed something odd. The driver's side window was rolled up, but the passenger window was cracked open about 2 inches. With rain coming, that seemed careless. He tried the door, unlocked. That was even more careless. This wasn't the kind of place where theft was a major concern, but still. He opened the door and leaned in. The car's interior smelled like coffee and pencil shavings. On the passenger seat was a sketchbook, open to a half-finished pencil drawing. Tyler recognized the subject immediately. A cypress knee rising from dark water, the bark rendered in careful detail showing every twist and spiral. The reflection in the water below was partially complete, distorted by ripples that she'd captured with just a few strategic smudges of graphite. In the corner of the page, in small, neat handwriting, he saw, Day 2. Morning light finally breaking through. Saw something moving in the water around dawn but couldn't make it out. Heron, maybe? Moved wrong for a bird, though. We'll try to find it again later. Tyler read that last sentence twice. Moved wrong for a bird. What did that mean? He carefully closed the sketchbook and left it on the seat where he'd found it. In the cup holder between the front seats was a stainless steel travel mug, empty. A phone charging cable dangled from the center console port, but no phone. She'd taken it with her, which was smart even though cell reception was basically non-existent this deep in the park. He used the door's interior button to roll up the passenger window most of the way, left just a crack for air circulation so the car wouldn't turn into an oven, and locked the door. As he walked back to his truck, he looked toward the trailhead. The wooden sign marking the entrance to the Kingsnake Trail stood at the edge of the parking area, weathered and moss-covered, with the standard warning about water levels and the recommendation for waterproof footwear. Beyond it, the trail disappeared into shadow within 20 feet. Artists often lost track of time, Tyler reminded himself. She was probably sitting by some tributary right now, trying to get the light just right on another sketch. She'd emerge from the forest in a few hours, apologetic about making anyone worry, with a sketchbook full of beautiful drawings and stories about the wildlife she'd seen. Probably. But as Tyler drove back toward the station, he couldn't stop thinking about that last sentence. Moved wrong for a bird. And more than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this morning was off. Not just the weather, not just the stillness. Something deeper. Something wrong at a level he couldn't articulate. 40 miles away and 18 hours earlier, Scarlett Morrison had been having the dream again. She was standing in water up to her knees, black water that didn't reflect light properly, in a forest she recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. The trees were wrong, too tall or too close together, or twisted in ways that trees didn't twist. And somewhere out in that water, just beyond where she could see clearly, something was watching her. Not watching like an animal watches, watching like it knew her, like it had been waiting specifically for her to arrive. In the dream, she tried to move, but couldn't. The water held her legs like thick mud, and when she looked down, she couldn't see her feet through the dark surface. Something brushed against her calf, smooth and cold and deliberate. Not a fish, not anything natural. She always woke up at that point, heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. This time had been no different. She'd lain there in her Charleston apartment, listening to her roommate Sarah snoring in the next room, waiting for her pulse to slow down. The dreams had started a week ago. Every night the same scenario with slight variations. Sometimes she was deeper in the water. Sometimes the thing watching her was closer. Sometimes she could almost make out a shape in the darkness before waking. Sarah had asked her about it over breakfast 3 days ago. You okay? You've been waking up a lot. Just stress dreams. You know how it is. About this camping trip? Maybe. I don't know. It's stupid. But it wasn't stupid. The dreams felt significant in a way she couldn't explain, like some part of her brain was trying to send a warning that her conscious mind refused to acknowledge. When she'd looked at the map of Congaree, at the network of swamps and waterways and primitive campsites, something had clicked. A sense of recognition. This was the place from her dreams, which was impossible. She'd never been to Congaree before, had never even seen photographs of it until she started researching places to practice her nature drawing. But the recognition had been undeniable, visceral, like meeting someone you'd only known online, and finding their face exactly matched your mental image. She should have canceled the trip. That was the sensible thing. But Scarlett had never been particularly sensible when it came to her art, and this felt important. Whatever was happening, whatever these dreams meant, she needed to go to Congaree, needed to see if the place matched her visions, needed to draw it, to capture it, to make it real on paper in a way that would prove she wasn't losing her mind. So she'd loaded her camping gear into the Honda, double-checked her supplies, and made the 2-hour drive from Charleston to the park. Arrived mid-afternoon on September 13th, under that same oppressive gray sky that seemed to be permanent here. Checked in at the ranger station, a young woman named Emma who'd been friendly and helpful, going over the trail map and recommending camping spots. King Snake Trail is beautiful, Emma had said, but it's the real deal. No boardwalks, lots of standing water, and you're pretty isolated out there. You comfortable with backcountry camping? Done it plenty of times, Scarlett had assured her, which was true. She'd camped all over the South, Georgia, North Carolina, even a week in the Everglades during college. She knew how to bear bag her food, how to purify water, how to spot the difference between a harmless rat snake and a venomous cottonmouth. What she didn't know was that some places had rules that went beyond basic wilderness survival. Rules that weren't written in any guidebook. She'd hiked in that afternoon, found one of the designated primitive campsites near the confluence where Cedar Creek met a smaller tributary. The site was perfect, a small rise of relatively dry land, just big enough for her tent, with a clear view of the water through a gap in the trees. She'd set up camp efficiently, hung her food bag from a branch 20 feet from the tent, and spent the remaining daylight sketching. That first evening had been fine. Beautiful, even. The light through the canopy turned golden as sunset approached, and she'd filled 3 pages of her sketchbook with studies of cypress knees, water reflections, and the particular way Spanish moss hung from the branches. As darkness fell, she'd eaten a cold dinner, trail mix and dried fruit, didn't want to bother with the camp stove, and climbed into her tent feeling accomplished and peaceful. The dreams didn't come that first night. She slept soundly, woke with the dawn, and immediately noticed how quiet everything was. No birds, no insects. Just absolute silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from the trees. That should have been her first warning. She'd emerged from her tent to find the forest shrouded in mist, the kind of ground fog that made everything look surreal and dreamlike. Her boots squelched in the mud as she walked to the water's edge to fill her water bottle. That's when she saw it, something in the water, maybe 30 feet offshore. Just a dark shape, breaking the surface briefly before submerging. Too large for a fish, too smooth for an alligator. It had moved in a way that seemed deliberate, purposeful, like it was letting her see it. Scarlett had stood there with her water bottle, watching the spot where the thing had disappeared, waiting for it to surface again. Minutes passed. The water remained undisturbed except for the mist drifting across its surface. Finally, she'd convinced herself it had been a trick of the light, an old log floating just beneath the surface, something perfectly natural. But when she got back to her tent and picked up her sketchbook, her hand had been shaking as she wrote that note. Saw something moving in the water around dawn but couldn't make it out. Heron, maybe. Moved wrong for a bird, though. Moved wrong. That was the best way she could describe it. The movement had been smooth but articulated, like something with joints and intention, but the shape had been all wrong for any animal she knew. Too long. Too angular. There and gone before her brain could fully process what her eyes had seen. She'd spent the rest of the morning trying to capture that wrongness in a sketch, but every attempt fell short. How do you draw something that was defined by being almost but not quite recognizable? She'd finally given up and decided to hike a bit, explore some of the smaller tributary trails that branched off from the main campsite area. That's when things had started going really wrong. By the time Emma arrived at the station at 9 a.m., Tyler had already checked the weather radar 3 times and finished a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint. She came in looking concerned, her phone in her hand. "I tried calling Morrison," she said without preamble. "Straight to voicemail. Tried twice." Tyler felt his stomach tighten slightly. "Could just be out of battery, or no signal where she is." "Yeah, that's what I figured. But I wanted you to know." Emma set her bag down and moved to the desk, logging into the computer. "I updated the website about the closure. Also sent out a message on our social media. Park closing at 2 p.m. All visitors should plan accordingly." "Good. We'll do a last patrol of the main trails around 1:30. Make sure anyone who hasn't seen the notices gets the message. Tyler stood and stretched. I'm going to head back up to Kingsnake around 1, check if her car's still there. If it is, we might need to consider a wellness check. Go in and make sure she's okay. You want me to come with you? If the car's there, yeah. 2 of us should go in if we're doing a search. But hopefully she'll be packed up and gone by then, and I'm worrying for nothing. Emma nodded, but didn't look convinced. She'd been working at Congaree for 2 years, long enough to develop her own instincts about when something felt off. Tyler, this morning, does it feel weird to you? Like the park itself? Weird how? I don't know. Quiet. I drove in on the main road and didn't see a single animal. No deer, no birds, nothing. And you know how talkative the crows usually are in the morning. I haven't heard a single one. Tyler had noticed the same thing but hadn't wanted to voice it, as if speaking the observation aloud would make it more real. Storm coming. Animals can sense pressure changes. They're probably hunkered down already. Maybe. Emma didn't sound convinced. Or maybe something else is out there. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the swamps around here. Said there were things that lived in the Blackwater, things that were here before people and would be here after. She was Gullah, grew up in these low country areas before they became parks and tourist spots. She knew things. What kind of things? Emma hesitated as if debating how much to say. She called it the Platt-Eye, said it appeared in different forms, sometimes as a massive dog with eyes like lanterns, sometimes as a hog, sometimes as something that looked almost human but wasn't. It led travelers astray, she said. Made them see things, hear things, got into their heads and turned them around until they were so lost they never found their way back. Tyler had heard similar stories from the locals over the years. Every swamp in the South had its legends, its cautionary tales meant to keep children from wandering too far into the water. He'd always filed them under folklore, interesting cultural history, but nothing more. You think that's what's got the animals quiet? He asked, keeping his tone light. The Platt-Eye? I think my grandmother wasn't stupid, Emma said flatly. And I think she lived in these swamps for 70 years without ever getting lost, without ever having anything bad happen to her because she knew when to pay attention. When the swamp goes quiet, that's when you should be most careful. That's when something is watching. Before Tyler could respond, the radio crackled to life. A ranger from the north section checking in, reporting that the boardwalk loop was clear of visitors. Normal, routine traffic. Tyler responded accordingly, then spent the next few hours dealing with the mundane logistics of closing the park early. He called the county sheriff's office to give them a heads up about the closure, updated the trail status on the Forest Service website, and started the process of locking up the facilities that would be closed during the storm. At 12:30, his radio crackled again. Emma, sounding tense. Tyler, I just got a call from someone on the boardwalk loop. They're reporting seeing footprints on the trail that just... Stop. Stop how? Like end in the middle of the path. No indication of where the person went next. The caller said it looked like someone had been running, then the prints just cease. Tyler felt something cold settle in his chest. Where exactly on the loop? About half a mile in from the main entrance near the big observation deck. That's not anywhere near Kingsnake. Could be unrelated. Could be, Emma agreed. But it's weird, right? I'm going to go check it out. I'll come with you. They drove to the boardwalk trailhead together, parked, and walked briskly along the elevated wooden path. The boardwalk had been built to make the park accessible to visitors who couldn't handle muddy trails. It wound through some of the most scenic sections of the old-growth forest, elevated on posts to protect the root systems of the massive trees. The couple who'd called it in, tourists from Ohio, clearly rattled, were waiting at the observation deck. They showed Tyler and Emma what they'd found. Footprints in the mud beside the boardwalk, clearly visible. Medium-sized boot treads heading parallel to the boardwalk for about 20 feet. The spacing indicated someone had been running, and then, just as the couple had described, they simply stopped. No indication of a turn, no suggestion of the person climbing onto the boardwalk or into the water. The prints just ended as if the person had been lifted straight up into the air. Could be a prank, Tyler said, thinking aloud. Someone walks forward, then carefully steps backward in their own prints to make it look like they vanished. But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't right. The mud was soft enough that doubling back would have distorted the prints, created visible overprinting. These were clean, singular impressions. "We'll document this and file a report," Emma told the couple. "It's probably nothing to worry about. Could be an optical illusion with the mud, or we're missing the continuation of the trail. But thank you for reporting it. You folks should head out now. We're closing the park in about an hour and a half due to the incoming storm." The couple nodded and headed back toward the parking area, glancing nervously over their shoulders. Once they were out of earshot, Emma turned to Tyler. "That's not a prank." "No," Tyler agreed quietly. "It's not." They stood there for a moment, looking at those impossible footprints, and then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, came a sound that made them both freeze. A voice. Female. Calling for help. But the voice was wrong. It came from too far away, too deep in the swamp where no one should have been. And there was something off about its cadence, as if the person calling was speaking just slightly too slowly, drawing out the syllables in a way that was almost but not quite natural. "Help. Me?" Tyler's hand went to his radio. "Did you hear that?" Emma nodded, her face pale. "We need to get back to the station now." They walked quickly back along the boardwalk, not quite running but close. Neither of them spoke until they were back in the truck, doors locked, engine started. "That wasn't Morrison," Emma said. "She's supposed to be miles from here on Kingsnake Trail." "I know. So who was that?" Tyler didn't answer, because he didn't have an answer that made any sense. Instead, he checked his watch, 1:15 p.m., and made a decision. "We're going to the Kingsnake Trailhead right now. If her car's still there, we go in. I don't care about the storm." The car was still there. Tyler and Emma stood in the parking area, staring at the blue Honda Civic that hadn't moved since that morning. The sky had darkened noticeably, taking on that greenish cast that precedes severe weather. Wind had picked up too, making the Spanish moss finally move, swaying in patterns that looked almost like pointing fingers. "All right," Tyler said, fighting to keep his voice steady and professional. "We go in. We check the campsite coordinates on her permit and we bring her out. Could be she's injured, twisted an ankle, couldn't make it back, could be a dozen things." But he didn't believe that, and neither did Emma. They geared up quickly. Day packs with emergency supplies, radios, GPS units, extra batteries for their flashlights even though it was mid-afternoon. Tyler pulled out the area map and marked the location of the primitive campsite Morrison had listed on her permit. 2 miles in, near the confluence. Straightforward trail for the first mile, then it got complicated. "Remember," he told Emma as they signed into the trail register, "we stick together. No splitting up. If we find her, we assess her condition, provide first aid if needed, and get her out as fast as possible. Storm's going to hit in 2, maybe 3 hours. We need to be back to the vehicles before then." They started hiking. The Kingsnake Trail began innocuously enough, a relatively clear path through palmetto understory, marked with the occasional trail blaze on the trees. But Tyler knew from experience that this was deceptive. Within a quarter mile, the trail would descend into the kind of terrain that gave Congaree its character and its challenge. They called Morrison's name as they walked, their voices swallowed by the forest. The wind had died down again, and in its absence the silence returned, deeper than before. Tyler found himself straining to hear anything. Birds, insects, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Nothing. Just their footsteps and their breathing and the occasional squelch of mud beneath their boots. After 20 minutes of hiking, they reached the point where the trail started to get serious. The path narrowed and began winding between massive tupelo and bald cypress trees, their trunks rising like pillars in a cathedral. Standing water appeared, first just shallow puddles but quickly deepening to ankle level and beyond. Tyler and Emma had worn their waterproof boots, but even so, the cold water found ways to seep in at the tops. "This is why I prefer the boardwalk sections," Emma muttered, testing her footing on a submerged log before stepping onto it. "At least there you know what's under your feet." They crossed a makeshift log bridge over a channel of black water, the logs slick with algae. Tyler went first, arms out for balance, trying not to look down at the water below. Something about it seemed deeper than it should be, darker, as if the bottom had dropped away into nothing. On the far side, Emma called out, "Tyler, look at this!" She was crouching beside a tree, pointing at something on the bark. Tyler moved closer and felt his blood run cold. Fresh scratches, 4 parallel gouges, cut deep into the cypress trunk. They were at chest height, maybe 5.5 feet off the ground, and they looked like they'd been made by something with claws, but the spacing was wrong, too wide for a bear, and besides, there hadn't been bears in this part of South Carolina for decades. "Could be a bobcat," Tyler said, not believing it even as he spoke. "That high up. And look at how deep they go. Whatever made these had to have been incredibly strong." Tyler reached out and touched one of the gouges. The wood inside was still light-colored, recently exposed. This had been made recently. Maybe today. Maybe hours ago. They continued hiking, moving faster now despite the difficult terrain. The sense of urgency that had been building all day crystallized into something sharper, more immediate. Something was very wrong here, and it had nothing to do with the weather. 40 minutes after leaving the trailhead, they reached the confluence where Morrison had been camping. Tyler recognized the landmarks from the description on her permit, the 2 creeks meeting, the slight rise of land that provided one of the few genuinely dry spots in this section of the park. And there, set up on that rise, was the tent. Blue and orange, the entrance flap hanging open like a mouth. "Scarlett?" Tyler called, his voice echoing slightly off the water. "Scarlett Morrison? Park Service." No response. They approached carefully, Tyler in the lead. The tent looked undisturbed from a distance, no signs of damage, no indication of a struggle. But as they got closer, Tyler noticed details that made his scalp prickle. The tent's stakes had been pulled partially out of the ground on one side, as if something had brushed against them. Muddy footprints, clearly from Morrison's boots based on the size and tread, led from the tent entrance to the water's edge. But there were those other marks too, the same ones Tyler had seen by the tree. Depressions in the mud that didn't quite make sense, too large and wrongly shaped. "Emma, photograph everything," he said quietly. While Emma pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, Tyler approached the tent. He called Morrison's name one more time, got no response, and crouched to look inside. Her gear was all there. Sleeping bag still in its stuff sack, small camp stove, water bottles, food bag visible through the mesh of the stuff sack where she'd properly hung it from a tree branch. Her backpack was there too, and when Tyler carefully opened it, he found her wallet. Scarlett Morrison, DOB 06-22-1994, organ donor, Charleston address. The photo on the license showed a young woman with dark hair and an open, friendly smile. Tyler stared at that smile for a long moment, wondering where she was right now, if she was still alive. "Tyler," Emma's voice was strained. "Come look at this." He emerged from the tent to find Emma standing about 30 yards away at the edge of the clearing where solid ground dissolved into standing water. She was pointing at a large cypress tree. Tyler walked over, his boots squelching in the increasingly wet ground, and saw what had made Emma's voice go tight with fear. Carved into the bark, scratched with something sharp, a knife maybe or a broken branch, were 2 words: "Help me." The letters were shaky, desperate, clearly carved by Morrison herself. Tyler recognized the same neat handwriting from her sketchbook. Below the words, deeper and more frantic, were more of those claw marks. 4 parallel gouges that seemed to come from nowhere. "She was here," Emma said unnecessarily. "She carved this. She needed help and we weren't—" "Stop," Tyler cut her off. "We couldn't have known. She wasn't supposed to leave until noon, and it's barely past 1 now. We came as soon as we had reason to be concerned." But guilt sat heavy in his chest anyway. What if they'd come earlier? What if he'd trusted that instinct this morning instead of rationalizing it away? "We need to expand the search," he continued, forcing himself to think procedurally. "She might be injured nearby. Call out, spread out a bit, but stay in visual contact." They spent the next 40 minutes searching in widening circles from the campsite. calling Morrison's name until their voices went hoarse. Tyler found more of her footprints, following what seemed to be a panicked path that looped and doubled back on itself multiple times. The track suggested she'd been running, but there was no obvious sign of what she'd been running from. And then, in a small clearing about 50 yards from her tent, the footprints simply stopped. Tyler stood at the edge of that clearing, staring down at the last clear print. It was in soft mud, perfect and complete, the heel impression deep, suggesting she'd been moving fast when she made it. And then, nothing. No more tracks. No indication of her stepping onto harder ground or into the water. The prints just ended exactly like those they'd found on the boardwalk earlier. "Tyler," Emma called from somewhere to his left. "We need to call this in. This is beyond us. We need search and rescue. We need the sheriff's department. We need..." Thunder boomed directly overhead, so loud and sudden that they both jumped. And as if that had been a signal, the rain began. Not gradually, not with a few warning drops. The sky opened up all at once, releasing water in sheets that made visibility drop to a few feet within seconds. Tyler pulled out his radio, trying to shield it from the downpour. "Congaree Station, this is Chambers. We have an emergency situation on Kingsnake Trail. Over." Static, thick and hissing through the rain noise. He tried again, holding the radio closer to his mouth. "Congaree Station, do you copy? This is Chambers. We need backup at the confluence site. Missing hiker. Possible injury. Over." More static, but this time there was something underneath it. A voice? Tyler couldn't make out words, but there was definitely something, speaking or whispering or... And then Emma screamed. Tyler spun, his heart slamming into his throat, and saw Emma pointing at something in the trees behind him. He turned to look and saw nothing but rain and shadows in the gray-brown trunks of the cypresses. "What? What did you see?" "There was someone there, standing between those trees watching us." Tyler squinted into the rain, trying to see what Emma had seen. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched, which had been a low hum in the back of his mind all day, suddenly intensified into certainty. They were not alone here. "We need to get back to the vehicles," he said. "Right now." They headed back toward the trail, moving fast but carefully through the rain-slicked terrain. Tyler took the lead, checking his GPS to make sure they were staying on course. Behind him, Emma was silent except for her labored breathing. The temperature had dropped what felt like 20 degrees in the past 10 minutes, and the rain was cold enough to make them both shiver despite the earlier heat. They were maybe half a mile from the trailhead, maybe 20 minutes from safety, when Tyler heard it. A voice calling from somewhere off to his left, somewhere deep in the water-filled forest. "Help. Please, someone help me." Female voice. Young. Could be Morrison. Tyler stopped so suddenly that Emma nearly collided with him. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Emma was breathing hard, her face pale and wet with rain. That voice. Someone calling for help. Emma was quiet for a moment, listening. The rain hissed through the canopy. Thunder rolled in the distance, but no other sounds came. "I don't hear anything except the storm." "It was right there," Tyler insisted, pointing. Maybe 50, 60 yards off trail. It sounded like a woman. Emma grabbed his arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Tyler, no. We stick to the trail. We get back to the station. We call this improperly. We do not go off trail." But even as she spoke, the voice came again. Clearer this time. Closer. "Please. I'm hurt. I can't move." "You really don't hear that?" Tyler stared at Emma. She shook her head, genuine fear in her eyes now. "Tyler, I'm telling you, I don't hear anything except rain and thunder. Whatever you're hearing, I'm not hearing it. And that should tell you something." That should have been enough. That should have stopped him. But the voice sounded so desperate, so pained, and if there was even a chance it was Morrison. "Stay here," he said, pulling his arm free from Emma's grip. "Keep calling my name every 30 seconds. If I don't answer within 5 minutes, go back to the trailhead and get help. I'm just going to look." "Tyler, don't do this." This is how people get lost. This is how we end up searching for the searchers. This is exactly what my grandmother warned about. The thing in the swamp that leads people astray makes them hear things. You're not hearing Morrison. You're hearing it. But Tyler was already moving, pushing through the palmetto and young trees, toward where the voice had come from. Behind him, he could hear Emma calling his name, pleading with him to come back, and that was good. Her voice was a tether, a lifeline to reality, the way people should sound. He pushed through a thicket and emerged in a small clearing. Standing water covered the ground here, deeper than elsewhere, maybe 8 or 9 inches. The rain was so heavy he could barely see across the clearing, but through the gray curtain of water he could make out a figure. A woman standing with her back to him, wearing a rain jacket and jeans, dark hair plastered to her head and shoulders. She was standing perfectly still in the middle of the clearing, facing a massive cypress tree, as if she were studying it or listening to it or... "Scarlett?" Tyler called, his voice nearly lost in the rain. "Scarlett Morrison?" The figure didn't turn, didn't respond, just stood there, motionless except for the rain streaming off her jacket. Tyler waded into the clearing, water immediately filling his boots and making every step heavy. Behind him he could still hear Emma calling his name, but she sounded farther away than she should have, as if the distance between them were stretching. "Miss Morrison?" He tried again, louder this time. "I'm a park ranger. Are you hurt?" Still no response. The woman just stood there, and now that Tyler was closer, he could see that something was wrong with how she was standing. Too straight. Too still. No one stands that still in cold rain. Especially not someone who's been lost and scared. And her shoulders were strange, too narrow or hunched in a way that didn't look right. "Ma'am?" His hand went to the radio on his belt, though he had no idea if it would work out here. "Can you hear me?" And then she turned. Not quickly, not in the sharp way a real person turns when startled or addressed. She pivoted slowly, mechanically, like a mannequin on a turntable, and as her face came into view through the rain, Tyler's breath stopped in his chest and something fundamental inside him recognized that he was looking at something that was not human and had never been human. It had a face. It wore a face the way Tyler wore his uniform. But the face was wrong in ways his brain struggled to process. The features were there. Eyes, nose, mouth, all in approximately the correct locations. But the proportions were subtly off, as if whoever or whatever had designed this face had worked from a description rather than a photograph. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too wide, extending just slightly past where a human mouth should stop. And the skin had a quality to it like wax or plastic, smooth and too uniform, reflecting the rain in a way that real skin didn't. But the worst part was the eyes. They weren't empty. That would have been better, Tyler thought later, if they'd been empty. Instead, they were watching him with an intelligence that was ancient and alien, and absolutely certain of what it wanted. The mouth opened, and the voice came out. The same voice he'd been following, the one calling for help. But now he could see that the mouth moved a fraction of a second after the words, like a badly dubbed film. And underneath the woman's voice were other voices, layered and discordant, all speaking slightly out of sync. "Help me. Please help me. Tyler, please." It knew his name. He had never told it his name. Morrison couldn't have known his name. But it knew. The thing that was wearing a woman's shape took a step toward him through the water, and Tyler saw its feet were wrong too. Too long, ending in something that wasn't quite toes. The rain seemed to bend around it strangely, as if the water itself was reluctant to touch it. "Help me, Tyler, I'm lost. I can't find my way back." Multiple voices, multiple tones, all slightly out of sync, and underneath them, barely audible, was a sound like laughter. Not human laughter. Something else. Tyler took a stumbling step backward, his hand finally finding the radio. Emma, answer me." The thing tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck, and its mouth stretched wider than any mouth should stretch. "Emma's gone, Tyler. You're alone now, just you and me, just like Morrison. She answered when I called. She came when I asked, and now she's part of the water. Part of the swamp. Part of me. And then it smiled. Tyler turned and ran. He crashed through the palmettos, branches tearing at his face and jacket, his boots slipping in the mud and water. Behind him he could hear it following, not running exactly, but moving fast in a way that didn't sound like footsteps. More like something heavy dragging through the water or multiple somethings moving in unison, all slightly out of step with each other. "Tyler!" Emma's voice cut through the rain like a blade. She was still there, still calling for him. Not gone. The thing had lied, because of course it had lied. That's what these things did. They lied and led you astray, and... He broke through the undergrowth and nearly crashed into Emma, who grabbed his arms. Her eyes widened as she took in his face, whatever she saw there making her own expression shift into pure fear. "What happened? Tyler, what did you see?" "Run," he gasped. "We need to run right now." Emma didn't ask more questions. They ran, slipping and sliding in the mud, using trees for support, the rain coming down so hard that Tyler could barely see 5 feet in front of them. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but the terror propelling him forward was stronger than any physical discomfort. Behind them, from somewhere in the rain and shadows, came the sound of voices. Multiple voices, all calling the same thing. "Tyler, Emma, come back. We're lost. Help us." They didn't look back. They just ran. The trailhead appeared through the rain like a mirage. The parking area and their vehicles, the most beautiful sight Tyler had ever seen. They reached his truck and practically fell inside, slamming the doors and hitting the locks. Tyler's hands shook so violently he could barely get the key in the ignition, but finally the engine roared to life and he threw the truck into gear. They drove back toward the station through the storm, neither of them speaking, both of them jumping at every flash of lightning or crack of thunder. The windshield wipers worked frantically, but could barely keep up with the downpour. It wasn't until they were a mile from the trailhead that Emma finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was that thing?" "I don't know." Tyler's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "But it knew our names, Emma. It was wearing Morrison's shape, or what it thought her shape should be. And it said she's part of the water now, part of the swamp." "The Platt Eye," Emma said, and now she was crying, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "My grandmother tried to warn me. She said when the swamp goes quiet, when everything stops making noise, that's when it's hunting. That's when it comes out to watch and wait and choose who it wants." Tyler wanted to tell her that was just folklore, just stories meant to scare children, but he couldn't. Not after what he'd seen in that clearing. Not after looking into those eyes that were and weren't human. They made it back to the station at 2:47 p.m., according to the clock on the wall that Tyler stared at for a full minute, trying to make his brain start working again. Emma sat at the desk, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm temperature inside, and called the sheriff's office on the landline. Tyler listened as she gave the report. Missing hiker Scarlett Morrison, last known location at the Confluence campsite on Kingsnake Trail. Campsite abandoned but gear present. No sign of subject despite extensive search. They needed search and rescue deployed as soon as weather permitted. They needed cadaver dogs. They needed help. The sheriff's deputy who took the call was sympathetic and professional. A unit would be sent out as soon as the storm passed, he promised. Search and rescue would be mobilized for first light tomorrow if Morrison didn't turn up overnight. Had they checked with local hospitals, just in case she'd somehow made it out and sought medical attention? No, Tyler admitted. They'd call around now. But even as Emma started making those calls, Tyler knew they wouldn't find Morrison in any hospital. She wasn't injured. She wasn't lost in the traditional sense. She was gone in a way that had nothing to do with medical emergencies or simple misadventure. The deputy also mentioned that they'd sent a patrol car to Morrison's last known address in Charleston earlier that day, had spoken with her roommate. Tyler listened as Emma relayed what the roommate had said, that Morrison had been acting strange for the past week, waking up screaming, claiming she heard someone calling her name in her dreams, that she'd felt compelled to come to Congaree like something was waiting for her there. The roommate said Morrison described the same dream every night, Emma continued, her voice flat. standing in black water with something watching her, something that knew her name. Tyler felt cold spread through his chest despite the blanket around his shoulders. It was calling her. Before she ever got here, it was already in her head, making her come to it. But why? Emma looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Why her specifically? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't need a reason. Maybe it just chooses, the way a predator chooses prey from a herd. They stayed at the station as the storm raged outside, neither of them willing to go home, neither of them wanting to be alone. The power flickered several times, but held. Tyler made coffee that neither of them drank. Emma pulled up Morrison's social media on her computer, scrolling through photos of a smiling young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. An art student who loved nature and camping, and whose last post had been a picture of a sunset with the caption, "Off to see the trees, back Sunday with sketches to share." She would never be back. Tyler knew that with a certainty that made him feel sick. Around 6 p.m., Emma's phone rang. Her boyfriend, worried about her being at work during the storm. She assured him she was fine, would be home soon. But after she hung up, she looked at Tyler. "I can't leave you here alone. Not after that. I'm fine. You should go home. Your boyfriend is worried." "Tyler." "I'll be okay. I'll lock the doors. I'll stay inside. Go home, Emma. Get some rest." She left reluctantly, making him promise to call if he needed anything, to not go back out to the trails until search and rescue arrived tomorrow. Tyler promised, even though he knew he wouldn't sleep tonight, wouldn't be able to rest until he understood what had happened to Morrison. If understanding was even possible. Alone in the station, Tyler tried to write up an incident report. Got as far as typing "subject last seen at campsite, no indication of struggle or injury" before stopping, his fingers frozen on the keyboard. How did he write what had actually happened? How did he explain what he'd seen in that clearing? He couldn't. So he closed the document and instead opened the park's historical records, searching for any mention of unusual disappearances or encounters with something that defied explanation. There were more than he expected. 1987. Hiker disappeared near Cedar Creek, never found. 1994. Search and rescue worker reported seeing something watching from the water before radio contact was lost for 3 hours. 2003. 2 campers reported hearing voices calling them by name from deep in the swamp. One of them followed the voices and was found 2 days later, incoherent and unable to explain where he'd been. 2011. Female hiker vanished from the Kingsnake Trail area. Her tent was found with all belongings intact. A note carved into a nearby tree read simply, "Help." The pattern was clear if you knew to look for it. Every 5 to 7 years, something like this happened. Someone vanished in a way that made no sense. And always it was near water. Always in the deepest, most isolated parts of the park. Tyler closed the browser and looked at the clock. 9:43 p.m. The storm had passed, leaving behind that peculiar silence that follows major weather. No insects yet emerged, no animals calling, just the drip of water from the trees and buildings. He should go home. His shift had ended hours ago. But the idea of driving through the dark, of passing by the Kingsnake trailhead on his way to the highway made his skin crawl. So he stayed, dozing fitfully in the office chair, jumping awake at every creak of the building settling or drip of water from the gutters. Sometime around midnight, Tyler woke from a dream he couldn't quite remember to find the station completely dark. The power had finally gone out, probably a tree down somewhere on the lines. He fumbled for his flashlight, clicked it on, and nearly dropped it. There was a face at the window, not pressed against the glass. Just there, outside in the darkness, barely illuminated by the reflection of his flashlight. A woman's face, pale and wet, with dark hair plastered to her skull. She was looking directly at him, not moving, not blinking. Tyler's breath stopped. He couldn't look away from that face, from those eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's eyes, like cat eyes, like nothing human. And then she smiled. Tyler lunged for the light switch even though he knew the power was out, frantically looking for his radio, his phone, anything. When he looked back at the window, the face was gone. But he could hear it now. From outside. From multiple directions at once. "Tyler. Come out, Tyler. She's here. Morrison is here. She wants to talk to you." Multiple voices, all slightly out of sync, all pretending to be human. Tyler grabbed his keys, grabbed his flashlight, and ran for his truck. He fumbled with the lock, nearly dropped the keys twice, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip anything. Finally, he got the door open, threw himself inside, and locked the doors. The voices continued, circling the truck now. "Don't leave, Tyler. We need your help. We're lost. So lost." He started the engine with a roar and threw the truck into gear, not caring about proper procedures or checking his mirrors or anything except getting away from this place. He drove out of the parking lot with his headlights on high beam, illuminating the rain-soaked forest on either side of the road. And there, standing at the edge of the tree line, he saw them. Figures. Multiple figures. Some looked almost human. Others were clearly wrong. Too tall, too thin, proportions all askew like funhouse mirror reflections. They stood perfectly still, watching him pass, and he thought he could see Morrison among them, or something wearing Morrison's shape. Tyler drove faster, not slowing down until he hit the highway, until the lights of civilization surrounded him, and the forest was miles behind. He drove all the way to Columbia, to his apartment, and didn't stop shaking until dawn broke and sunlight flooded through his windows. The search for Scarlett Morrison officially began at 6 a.m. the following morning. Search and rescue teams mobilized from 3 counties with cadaver dogs and drone operators and all the technology modern search efforts could provide. Tyler returned to Congaree to assist, though he never went back to the Kingsnake Trail area himself. The search continued for 9 days. They found her campsite exactly as Tyler and Emma had described it. Tent intact, gear present, food properly stored. They found the message carved into the tree. "Help me." They found her footprints leading to the water's edge, and then that clearing where they simply stopped. They found no body, no blood, no sign of struggle, no indication of what had happened to Scarlett Morrison after her footprints ended in that impossible place. On day 7, the cadaver dogs hit on something near the confluence. Everyone's hopes rose. Maybe they'd finally found her. Maybe there would be closure for her family. But when they excavated the area, all they found were bones. Old bones, decades old at least, from someone who'd gone missing long before Morrison was even born. On day 10, the search was officially suspended. Morrison was declared missing, presumed dead due to environmental factors. The official report listed undetermined cause and circumstances under investigation. But Tyler knew that investigation would never produce answers. At least not answers that anyone would believe. He requested a transfer, filled out all the paperwork, wrote a compelling case for why he needed to work at a different park, preferably somewhere dry, somewhere without swamps or standing water or places where ancient things could hide. The request was denied. Budget cuts, the regional supervisor explained. Personnel shortages. They couldn't afford to move people around right now. He was needed at Congaree. Maybe next year he could apply again. Tyler went back to work because he had no choice. He filed reports, led tours, checked permits, did all the mundane tasks that made up a ranger's daily routine. But he never went back to the Kingsnake Trail. He found reasons to assign that area to other rangers, to send volunteers when trails needed maintenance to avoid it entirely. Emma lasted 3 more months before she quit. Found a job at a state park on the coast, she said. Somewhere she could see the horizon, somewhere without trees pressing close and water that ran black as ink. She didn't say it was because of what they'd seen, but they both knew. The new ranger who replaced her, a young guy fresh out of training, eager and confident, asked Tyler about the best places to camp in the park. Tyler almost told him about Kingsnake, about the confluence where the trees were tallest and the water ran deepest. Almost told him about the face at the window and the voices that called in the night. But he didn't, because what would he say? That there was something in the swamp that wore human faces and led travelers astray? That it remembered those who'd seen it and would keep calling them back until they answered? Instead, he said, "Stick to the boardwalk areas. The primitive campsites can be tricky, especially if you're new. The kid nodded, clearly disappointed by such cautious advice, and Tyler wondered how long it would be before he stopped being new, before he learned that some places had rules that went beyond what was written in the Ranger Handbook. 2 months after the search ended in early November, when the weather had finally cooled and the birds had returned to Congaree's forests, Tyler was doing paperwork when the phone rang. A hiker reporting something strange near the old confluence site said they'd seen what looked like a memorial someone had left, flowers and a wooden cross. Tyler knew he should go check it out. It was his job, his responsibility. But the idea of driving back to that parking area, of walking back down that trail, made his hands start shaking. He sent the new ranger instead, told him to take photos, file a report. The kid came back 2 hours later, looking confused. The memorial's there, like the caller said. Just a simple wooden cross with Scarlett Morrison carved into it. But Tyler, there were fresh footprints around it. Probably the person who put it there. No, I mean fresh as in made this morning. Small footprints like a woman's hiking boots. They led from the memorial to the water's edge, then just kept going. Into the water. I followed them for maybe 15 feet before they got too deep, but I could still see them continuing down into the dark, like someone just walked into the water and kept walking. Tyler felt his blood turn to ice. Did you see anyone? Hear anything? No, but I got this weird feeling like something was watching me, and the birds went quiet while I was there, not gradually, just suddenly, like someone had hit a mute button. I got out of there pretty quick. Smart kid, Tyler thought. Smarter than he'd been that day in September. File your report, he said. Mark that area as potentially hazardous and recommend we close it to camping for the season. Is there something I should know about that area? Tyler looked at the kid's young, earnest face and thought about all the things he could say. About things that wore human faces. About voices that called you by name. About Morrison standing in those dreams weeks before she ever set foot in the park. About the way some places were hungry, ancient, patient as stone. Just that some parts of the park are more dangerous than others, he said finally. Some places, people get lost, and they don't come back the same. If they come back at all. The kid nodded slowly, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but sensing this wasn't the time. He filed his report and didn't mention the footprints leading into the water, because he was smart enough to know that some things looked better left out of official paperwork. Tyler still works at Congaree, still drives past the Kingsnake trailhead twice a week when he makes his rounds. He never stops there anymore, never looks too closely at the tree line, but sometimes on certain mornings when the air hangs heavy and still, when the birds go silent and the forest seems to hold its breath, he hears it. A voice, calling from somewhere in the swamp. Sometimes it sounds like Morrison. Sometimes it sounds like Emma, though Emma is alive and well 300 miles away. Sometimes it sounds like his own voice, calling to him from the place he'd be if he'd followed those voices all the way in. If he'd let the water close over his head and joined whatever community of lost souls exists in that dark place. He never answers, but the invitation is always there, patient and persistent, waiting for the moment when his guard drops or his curiosity overwhelms his fear, or he simply forgets why he should be afraid. Because that's the thing about the Platte-Eye, about the thing in the water, about whatever it is that lives in the deep places of Congaree. It remembers. It's patient. And it knows that eventually, everyone who's heard its voice answers. Eventually. Tyler just hopes that day never comes for him. But on nights when he can't sleep, when he lies in his Columbia apartment and listens to the ordinary sounds of the city, he sometimes hears underneath them a whisper of something else. The sound of black water lapping at cypress knees, the drip of rain from Spanish moss, and very faintly, almost too quiet to hear, a voice calling his name. Just once, just to remind him that it's still out there, still watching, still waiting. I did the Incident Report, National Park Service Case. CNP 2018-0914, M status, suspended investigation. Subject, Morrison, Scarlett, DAB 0622, 1994. Last known location, Kingsnake Trail, Congaree National Park. SC date, September 14th, 2018. Summary. Subject failed to exit park, as scheduled. Extensive search conducted September 14th, 2018. No remains recovered. No evidence of foul play. No physical evidence of environmental hazard, animal attack, drowning, exposure. Subject's campsite found intact with all personal belongings present. Several anomalous features noted during search operations but deemed non-material to official finding. Case classified as missing person, presumed deceased due to undetermined environmental factors. Investigation suspended pending new evidence. Notes. Lead Ranger T. Chambers and Assistant Ranger E. Rodriguez reported unusual conditions during initial search operation. Details filed under separate cover and sealed per request of rangers involved. Search team members reported similar anomalies, but attributed to severe weather conditions during search period. Of note, 7 previous disappearances in the same general area between 1987 to 2011, all sharing similar characteristics: solo hikers, campsite intact, no remains recovered. Pattern may merit further analysis by regional office. Case remains open. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 28, 2014. The morning fog hung over Rainy Lake like a burial shroud, thick enough that Nathan could barely see the dock 20 feet from the ranger station window. He stood with his coffee mug warming both hands, watching gray moisture swirl and drift in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. October in Voyageurs always felt like the park was closing itself off from the world, sealing away its secrets before winter locked everything down for good. The tourist season had ended 3 weeks ago. Now it was just him, 2 other rangers at distant stations, and whatever remained in the wilderness when humans weren't looking. The coffee was too hot, bitter from sitting on the burner too long, but Nathan drank it anyway. It was part of the routine, the same routine he'd followed for 6 years now, ever since he'd transferred up from the Boundary Waters after finishing his forestry degree. Wake at dawn, check the weather reports, monitor the radio channels, inspect the equipment even though nothing ever changed overnight. The rituals of competence, his first supervisor had called them. The things you do so that when something goes wrong, your hands know what to do before your brain catches up. Outside, the temperature hovered just above freezing. The forecast called for freezing rain by afternoon, possible snow overnight. The park would be completely empty by then. Even the handful of late-season kayakers who sometimes tried to squeeze in one last trip before the lakes froze would be long gone. Nathan set down his mug and reached for the radio handset mounted on the wall. Voyageurs dispatch, this is Rainy Lake Station. Morning check-in. Static crackled for a moment before Claire's voice came through clear and professional. Morning, Nathan. We copy. Weather looking rough today. Affirmative. I'm going to do a sweep of the Kettle Falls area, check on the winter shutdowns, make sure everything's secured. Should be back by 1400. Copy that. Radio check every 2 hours. Stay warm out there. Will do. Rainy Lake Station out. Nathan clipped the radio to his belt and pulled on his jacket, a heavy waterproof shell over his fleece, both in the distinctive Park Service green and gray. His boots were already laced, sitting by the door where he'd set them the night before. Knife on his belt, flashlight, first aid kit, compass as backup even though he had GPS, bear spray even though the bears were long since denned up for winter, the tools of the trade, each in its designated place, each checked and rechecked until the checking itself became a form of meditation. He stepped outside into air that tasted of ice and dead leaves. The dock creaked under his weight as he walked down to where his patrol boat was tied up, a 17-foot aluminum hull with an outboard motor that had seen better days, but still fired up on the first pull every morning. The lake spread out before him, invisible beyond 15 feet, the fog so dense it seemed to have weight and substance. Sound behaved strangely in conditions like this, sometimes carrying voices for miles, sometimes swallowing them completely just a few yards away. Nathan untied the mooring lines and pushed off from the dock. The motor coughed once, then caught, settling into its familiar growl. He eased the throttle forward and the boat slid into the gray void, the world reducing itself to a circle of dark water around him and an infinite wall of white beyond. He knew these waters like he knew his own hands. Every rock, every shallow, every inlet and channel. He could navigate them blind if he had to, just by the feel of the current and the sound of water against stone. But something felt different this morning. It was nothing he could name, just a quality to the silence beneath the motor's noise, a sense of the fog watching him, rather than simply obscuring his view. Nathan had spent enough time alone in the wilderness to know that the human mind invented patterns in randomness, saw faces in tree bark, heard voices in wind. He knew the difference between real danger and the imagination's conjuring. This felt like neither. This felt like standing in a room where someone had just left, the air still disturbed by their passing, but no evidence remaining except the certainty that you weren't alone. He checked his GPS. Right on course for Kettle Falls. The screen glowed green and steady, the little arrow representing his boat creeping steadily northwest. 20 minutes at this speed, maybe 25 in the fog. He'd done this run 100 times. Nothing to it. The radio crackled. Rainy Lake, this is dispatch. Nathan grabbed the handset. Go ahead, dispatch. We've got a vehicle in the Ash River parking area, been there since yesterday afternoon. Silver Honda Civic, plates registered to an Allison Reeves, Minneapolis address. She filed a day permit for a solo kayak trip to Kettle Falls. Was supposed to be back out last night. You see any sign of her on your patrol? Nathan's stomach tightened slightly. Not alarm yet, but the first whisper of concern. Solo paddlers this late in the season were rare but not unheard of. Usually experienced people who knew what they were doing. But overnight in these temperatures, especially if the freezing rain had started early. Negative contact yet, dispatch. I'm heading to Kettle Falls now for routine inspection. I'll keep an eye out. What's the description? Female, 28, 5'6", brown hair, likely wearing a red waterproof jacket. Experienced paddler according to her permit notes. She's done this route before. Copy that. I'll radio in when I reach Kettle Falls. Rainy Lake out. Nathan increased his speed slightly, the boat's bow lifting as it cut through water he couldn't see. The fog seemed to thicken as he moved deeper into the lake, as if the park itself were closing around him. He'd participated in search and rescue operations before. Lost hikers, capsized canoes, the occasional tourist who'd wandered off trail and couldn't find their way back. Most ended well. People turned up cold and embarrassed but alive. Sometimes they didn't turn up at all, and those were the ones that stayed with you. The ones you thought about during the long winter nights when the station creaked and settled and sounded like footsteps in empty rooms. The motor's pitch changed as he entered shallower water, and Nathan throttled back, letting the boat drift as he oriented himself. Somewhere ahead through the fog was the channel that led to Kettle Falls, a narrow passage between high stone walls where the water ran fast and cold even in summer. The old hotel stood there, a historic building from the logging days, now shuttered for the season. If Allison Reeves had been heading to Kettle Falls, that's where she would have pulled up her kayak, maybe explored the building or hiked the short trail to the falls themselves. A sound cut through the fog, not the motor, not the water. Something else. Nathan killed the engine, letting the boat drift in sudden silence. There it was again. A voice. Faint and far away, but definitely human. Calling something he couldn't quite make out. Hello? Nathan shouted into the gray. This is the National Park Service. Can you hear me? Silence. Just the lap of water against the hull, the distant drip of condensation from invisible trees. Then again, help. The word drifted through the fog like smoke, directionless and strange. Please help me. Nathan grabbed the spotlight mounted on the boat's bow and switched it on, sweeping the beam through the fog. It barely penetrated 10 feet, but in that circle of light he could see dark water and nothing else. He cupped his hands around his mouth. Keep calling, I'll follow your voice. Where are you? Nothing. He waited, the boat rocking gently, his hand resting on the motor's pull start. Professional instinct warred with something deeper, some animal awareness that whispered caution. The voice had sounded wrong somehow, not frightened, not panicked, but flat, almost curious, like someone testing a word they'd heard but didn't fully understand. Nathan shook off the thought. Someone was in trouble. That was his job, to help people in trouble. He yanked the motor back to life and eased forward, following the direction the voice had seemed to come from. The GPS showed him approaching the channel to Kettle Falls, right where Allison Reeves would have been. The fog shifted, and suddenly he could see the channel mouth, a narrow cut between high rock walls streaked with lichen and old water stains. The current pushed against his boat as he entered, the motor straining slightly. Here the sound of water changed, became a low rushing that echoed off the stones, and there, pulled up on a small gravel beach at the channel's edge, was a red kayak. Nathan's heart sank and lifted at once. Sank because an abandoned boat was never a good sign. Lifted because at least he'd found something, a place to start the search. He maneuvered his boat alongside the kayak and killed the motor, letting momentum carry him to the gravel. The sound of the hull scraping against stone was obscenely loud in the enclosed space. He stepped out into ankle-deep water, not caring that it poured over the tops of his boots, and crouched beside the kayak. It was expensive, well-maintained, and completely empty. No paddle, no life jacket. A dry bag was strapped behind the seat, but when Nathan opened it, he found only a car key, a wallet, and a cell phone in a waterproof case. He checked the phone. No signal, of course, but the last message sent was yesterday at 3:47 p.m. At Kettle Falls, gorgeous day, be back by 7. Nathan straightened and looked around. The hotel was visible now through the thinning fog, a long wooden building with a sagging porch and dark windows. The old logging-era structure somehow managing to look both picturesque and vaguely threatening in the gray light. The trail to the falls proper led off to the right, marked by a weathered sign. "Allison Reeves," he called out. "This is the National Park Service. If you can hear me, call out." The only answer was the rush of water, and a sound that might have been wind in the trees or might have been something else entirely. Nathan grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Rainy Lake. I've located the missing kayaker's boat at Kettle Falls. No sign of the individual yet. I'm going to conduct a ground search of the immediate area." "Copy, Rainy Lake. Be advised, freezing rain starting at your location in approximately 30 minutes. Don't stay out too long." "Understood. We'll update in 1 hour. Out." Nathan secured his boat and shouldered his pack, which contained water, emergency supplies, rope, and flares. He started up the trail toward the hotel, his boots leaving clear prints in the mud. The fog was definitely thinner here, pulled apart by the wind that funneled through the channel. He could see perhaps 50 feet now, far enough to make out the details of the building. The peeling paint, the boards nailed over some windows, the old stone chimney rising against the gray sky. Something moved in his peripheral vision. Nathan spun toward it, hand instinctively dropping to the bear spray on his belt. Nothing, just trees, their bare branches stirring in wind he couldn't feel. He took a breath, forcing his shoulders to relax. Adrenaline was useful, but panic was deadly. Stay calm. Stay professional. Someone needed help, and he was going to find them. "Allison," he called again. "If you're injured and can't move, make any noise you can. I'm here to help." He climbed the steps to the hotel's porch. The boards groaned under his weight, and he tested each one before putting his full weight down. The front door was locked, a heavy padlock through a hasp, exactly as it should be. He walked around the building, checking windows and doors, looking for any sign of forced entry or disturbed ground. Nothing. Everything was exactly as it should be for a building sealed up for winter. But the feeling of being watched intensified with every step. Nathan had felt this before, many times, the sense of animal eyes following your movements, predator or prey evaluating whether you were a threat or an opportunity. But this was different. Animals watched with intent you could understand. Hunger, fear, territorial defense. This watching felt curious, patient, like something conducting an experiment and waiting to see what the subject would do. He rounded the back corner of the hotel and stopped, There were footprints in the mud, small, human-sized, barefoot. Nathan crouched and studied them. They led away from the hotel toward the tree line, clear and deep in the soft ground. But that made no sense. The temperature was barely above freezing. No one would be walking barefoot out here. He looked closer and felt his stomach turn slightly. The prints were small, almost childlike, but the proportions were wrong. The toes too long, the heel too narrow, and there were only 4 toes on each foot. He stood quickly, hand going to his radio. But he hesitated. What was he going to say? That he'd found weird footprints? That something about this situation felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate? Claire would send backup, probably request a full search and rescue team from the state, but that would take hours. By then, if Allison Reeves was hurt and hypothermic, Nathan made a decision. He'd follow the tracks, see where they led. 20 minutes, no more. If he didn't find anything by then, he'd call it in and wait for reinforcements. The tracks led into the forest, following a path that seemed deliberate but matched no trail Nathan knew. He marked his route carefully, breaking branches and stacking rocks, making sure he could find his way back. The trees closed in quickly, their trunks dark with moisture, their branches reaching overhead like interlocked fingers. The fog had settled here into something more like mist, drifting in thin layers that made distances deceptive. After 10 minutes of walking, Nathan realized he couldn't hear the falls anymore. That was wrong. The sound of kettle falls carried for nearly a mile in every direction. The constant rumble of water over stone was part of the acoustic landscape. You could navigate by it. But now there was only silence, broken occasionally by the drip of condensation and the soft crunch of his boots on frozen leaves. And then he heard the voice again. Nathan. He froze. It was Allison's voice. It had to be. The right pitch, the right tone. But Allison Reeves didn't know his name. He hadn't found her yet. He hadn't introduced himself. Nathan, I'm lost. Please help me. I'm so cold. The voice came from ahead and to the left, maybe 30 yards away. Nathan moved toward it, every instinct screaming at him to stop, but his training pushing him forward. Someone needed help. That was what mattered. Keep talking, he called out. I'm coming toward you. Are you injured? I'm lost, the voice repeated. So cold. Please, Nathan, please help me. The words were right, but the rhythm was wrong. Too flat, too evenly spaced, like someone reading from a script they didn't quite understand. Nathan pushed through a stand of birch trees and emerged into a small clearing he'd never seen before, despite 6 years of patrolling these woods. The clearing was perfectly circular, ringed by trees that leaned inward at unnatural angles. In the center was a pile of stones, not a natural formation but deliberately stacked, each rock balanced on the one below in a cairn that reached nearly 4 feet high. And all around the cairn, scratched into the dirt, were symbols. Not English, not any language Nathan recognized. Just marks, curves, and lines and dots that seemed to shift when he looked at them directly. Hello, Nathan. He spun. The voice was behind him now. Still Allison, but closer. Too close. He could hear her breathing, or something like breathing. A wet, raspy sound that made his skin crawl. Who's there? His voice came out steadier than he felt. Show yourself. Laughter. High and strange, like wind chimes made of bone. And then something moved at the edge of his vision again. Low to the ground, scuttling between trees with a motion that was wrong. Too fast, too fluid, like a spider the size of a child. Nathan grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Rainy Lake. I'm at... He looked at his GPS. The screen showed static, the satellite signal gone. Dispatch, do you copy? Nothing. Not even static. Just silence, as if the radio had become a dead piece of plastic in his hand. The machines don't work here, said Allison's voice now from his right. Not where we are. Not in the thin places. Nathan pulled out his flashlight and swept the beam across the clearing. For just a moment, the light caught something. A shape, small and hunched, skin the gray of old wood, eyes that reflected yellow like a cat's. Then it was gone, and the laugh came again from somewhere behind him. What do you want? Nathan demanded. "Where is Allison Reeves?" "She came looking," the voice said. And now it was changing, becoming lower, rougher, losing its human quality. "She heard us calling. She thought we needed help. So trusting. So warm." Nathan's mind raced through everything he knew about the park. Its history, its folklore. The old Ojibwe stories his predecessor had told him during long winter nights at the station. Tales of the Pukwudgiesi, the little people of the woods. Tricksters and shapeshifters who stole voices and lured the unwary into places between the world of men and the world of spirits. He'd dismissed them as campfire stories, the kind of thing you told to scare tourists who didn't respect the wilderness. He wasn't dismissing them now. "Where is she?" Nathan repeated, forcing authority into his voice. "Tell me where she is and I'll leave. I won't come back here." "But we want you to come back," the voice said. And now it was his own voice speaking to him, Nathan's words echoing from the trees. "We've been so alone, so hungry. You'll stay. You'll keep us company. You'll tell us all your stories, and then you'll become a story yourself. The ranger who disappeared. The one who walked into the fog and never came out." Something grabbed his ankle. Nathan looked down and saw a hand, too small, too gray, fingers too long, wrapped around his boot. He kicked hard, felt it release, and ran. Behind him came sounds that weren't laughter anymore, weren't anything human at all. Shrieks and chattering and the thump of multiple things moving through the undergrowth in pursuit. He ran without direction, just away, crashing through brush and leaping over fallen logs. His marker trail was gone. Either he'd lost it or it had been moved, impossible to tell which. The trees seemed to grow closer together with every step, branches snagging his jacket, roots reaching up to trip him. The GPS was useless. The radio was dead. He was alone in country he thought he knew, but that had transformed into something alien and hostile. And then he broke through the tree line and nearly ran straight off a cliff. Nathan grabbed a sapling at the last second, his momentum almost carrying him over the edge into nothing. He looked down and saw water, not the channel, not the lake, but a pool of black water that reflected nothing, not even the gray sky above. Steam rose from its surface in thick coils, and the smell that came up with it was sweet rot and old meat. "There you are." He turned. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, the size and shape of a child, but wrong in every detail. Gray skin stretched tight over a frame that seemed to have too many joints. A face that was almost human, but not quite, like a mask carved by someone who'd only heard faces described and never seen one. Eyes that glowed amber in the dim light, pupils horizontal like a goat's. "We showed you mercy," the thing said in Nathan's voice. "We gave you warning, but you kept coming. You kept looking. Now you're here, and here is where you stay." More of them emerged from the trees. 3, 4, 6. He lost count. They moved with disturbing synchronization, like puppets controlled by the same strings. Some wore scraps of clothing, old fabrics rotted into rags. Others were naked, their skin marked with scars and symbols similar to the ones scratched in the clearing. "The other one cried," said the thing wearing Nathan's voice. "Screamed and begged. It was disappointing. You're different. You're quiet. That's good. We like the quiet ones. They last longer." Nathan's mind worked frantically. The cliff behind him, the creatures ahead. No weapons except the bear spray, which wouldn't do anything against whatever these were. No backup coming, no way to call for help. But he was still alive, still thinking, and as long as he was thinking, he had a chance. "What did you do with Allison?" he asked, buying time. "She's here. Part of here. In the water, in the trees, in us. She's everywhere now. Would you like to see?" One of the creatures stepped forward and opened its mouth impossibly wide. In the darkness of its throat, Nathan saw something pale and limp, fingers curled into claws, a scrap of red fabric. He grabbed the bear spray and fired, sweeping the stream across the group. They shrieked and scattered, but not from pain, from surprise, from offense at being attacked. Nathan didn't wait. He ran along the cliff edge, looking for a way down, a path, anything. Behind him came the sound of pursuit, faster now, angry. The cliff descended in a series of natural steps, rocky outcrops he could climb if he was careful. No time for careful. Nathan jumped, grabbed, slid down 10 feet and landed hard, his ankle screaming protest. He kept moving, half climbing and half falling, chunks of loose stone bouncing down ahead of him. The creatures followed, but they were faster on level ground. Here, descending, he had a brief advantage. His hand hit something metal. A cable, old and rusty, bolted into the rock face. Some long-abandoned climbing route or safety line. Nathan grabbed it and used it to swing down the last 15 feet, landing in shallow water at the cliff base. Not the black pool. This was different, clearer, and he could see his own boots beneath the surface. The channel. He'd somehow circled back to the channel. Nathan splashed through the water, ignoring the cold soaking into his clothes, and there, impossibly, mercifully, was his boat, still tied where he'd left it. He threw himself into it, fumbled with the mooring line, got it free. The motor. Pull the cord. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Going somewhere? 3 of the creatures stood on the gravel beach, watching him with their terrible amber eyes. More descended the cliff face, moving like spiders, horizontal on vertical rock. Nathan pulled the cord again. The motor sputtered, coughed, died. "The machines don't work here," they said in chorus. "Not in the thin places, not where we are." He looked at them, then at the motor, then back. They were right. The motor wouldn't start because this wasn't the real channel, or it was the real channel but somewhere else, somewhere that existed in a fold between what was and what couldn't be. But there was still a paddle. Emergency equipment, strapped under the seat. Nathan grabbed it and pushed off from the beach, driving the blade into the water with desperate strength. The current caught the boat, pulled it into the center of the channel. The creatures shrieked and poured into the water after him, their small bodies churning the surface into froth. Nathan paddled like his life depended on it, which it did. The current was with him, pulling him downstream, away from the things that reached with impossible hands and called his name in voices he recognized. The fog closed in again, and for once he was grateful for it, grateful for any barrier between him and what hunted him. He paddled until his arms burned, until his lungs felt like they would burst, until the shrieking faded to silence, and he could hear his own heartbeat again, loud and fast in his ears. And then the fog lifted. Nathan found himself in open water, the lake spreading around him under clearing skies. His GPS flickered back to life, showing his position a mile east of Kettle Falls. The radio crackled. "Any lake, this is dispatch. Nathan, do you copy? We've lost contact." "I'm here," he gasped into the handset. "I copy. I'm here." "Thank God. What's your status? We've got the search team mobilizing." "Call them off." Nathan looked back toward where he'd come from. The channel mouth was visible now, normal and unremarkable in the afternoon light. Just rock and water and trees. Nothing moving. Nothing watching. "Call them off. She's gone." "Nathan, we can't just..." "She's gone," he repeated. "I found her kayak, but no sign of the individual. Weather's getting worse. It's too dangerous for a full search today. We'll need to resume tomorrow when conditions improve." A long pause. Then, "Copy that. Return to station. We'll coordinate the official search for first light tomorrow." Nathan didn't respond. He just sat in his boat, paddle across his knees, and stared at the channel. After a moment, he picked up the paddle and started rowing, not toward the ranger station, toward the Ash River parking lot where a silver Honda Civic sat with no one coming back for it. He needed to see it, needed to confirm that Allison Reeves had been real, that she'd existed before she'd walked into the park and encountered something that shouldn't exist at all. The parking lot was empty, except for the Civic. Nathan pulled his boat up on the beach and walked across cold asphalt to the car. He cupped his hands around his eyes and looked through the driver's window. A travel mug in the cup holder, a paperback book on the passenger seat, mystery novel, well worn, a dream catcher hanging from the rearview mirror. the ordinary debris of a life that had ended in screaming and darkness and transformation into something that lived in the throats of creatures with amber eyes. Nathan stepped back from the car. His hands were shaking. He made them stop through sheer force of will. The official search would find nothing. He knew that with absolute certainty. They'd look for 3 days, maybe 4, sweeping the area around Kettle Falls with dogs and boats and helicopters. They'd find her kayak, her dry bag, her footprints leading away from the hotel. The trail would end where the footprints became something else, something they wouldn't be able to explain. Eventually, they'd conclude she'd fallen into the water and been swept away, or gotten lost and succumbed to hypothermia, or met any number of mundane ends that happened to people in the wilderness when they weren't careful. None of them would find the clearing with its cairn and symbols. None of them would hear the voices calling from the fog. None of them would see the Pukwudjiesi, because the Pukwudjiesi didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Not until they were ready for their next visitor. Nathan walked back to his boat. The sun was setting now, throwing long shadows across the water. The freezing rain had started, light but persistent, turning everything to ice. He pushed off from shore and started the motor. It caught on the first pull, because this was the real world again. The world where machines worked and physics made sense, and there were no thin places where ancient things waited for the unwary. But as he headed back toward the ranger station, Nathan knew he'd never forget what he'd seen. Never forget Allison Reeves and her last moments, consumed by things that wore her voice like a costume. Never forget the feeling of being hunted in country he'd thought he owned. The radio crackled again. Rainy Lake, this is dispatch. Nathan grabbed the handset with nerveless fingers. Go ahead. Just checking in. You sound pretty shaken up. You want me to have someone meet you at the station? Did he? Would it help to tell someone what he'd seen? Would they believe him? Would they do anything except look at him with concern and suggest he take a few days off? Maybe talk to someone? Negative. Dispatch. I'm fine. Just cold and tired. I'll file my report when I get back. Copy that. See you tomorrow for the search. Yeah, Nathan said. Tomorrow. But he already knew he wouldn't be there tomorrow. Couldn't be there, because if he went back to Kettle Falls, back into those woods, the things that lived there would remember him. They'd already shown him their world once, given him a glimpse of the thin places. They wouldn't let him leave a second time. Nathan pulled up to the ranger station dock just as full darkness fell. The building's windows glowed yellow, warm and welcoming. He tied up the boat with automatic motions, gathered his gear, walked up the dock on legs that felt like wood. Inside, he turned on every light in the building and locked every door and window. Then he sat at his desk and tried to write his report. At approximately 0930 hours, I located the missing kayaker's vessel at Kettle Falls. The words came haltingly, official and bloodless. No mention of the clearing, no mention of the creatures, no mention of the truth. Just the facts that would make sense to people who lived in a world where monsters were metaphors and folklore was superstition. He was still writing when dawn came. 3 days later, the official search was called off. Allison Reeves was declared missing, presumed dead, lost to one of 1,000 mundane tragedies that befell people in the wilderness every year. Nathan filed his transfer request that same afternoon, a move to Badlands National Park in South Dakota, as far from water and trees and fog as he could get while staying within the Park Service. The request was denied. Budget constraints, they said. Personnel shortages. He was needed at Voyageurs, especially now with the upcoming investigation into the missing hiker case. So Nathan stayed, and every morning he woke to fog on the lake, to the sound of water against the dock, to the knowledge that the thin places were still out there, still waiting, still hungry. And sometimes in the hour before dawn, when the world was quiet and dark, he'd hear his radio crackle to life with no one on the other end. Just silence and breathing, and underneath it all a sound like laughter, high and strange and not quite human. The Pukwudjiesi remembered him, and they were patient. They could wait. After all, he wasn't going anywhere. Adurdar. Incident report. Addendum. On November 2nd, 2014, park rangers conducting a follow-up search discovered several anomalies in the Kettle Falls area. A circular clearing approximately 20 meters in diameter, previously unmapped. A cairn of stones in the clearing's center, estimated age undetermined. Markings in the soil around the cairn, origin unknown. 4 separate reports from search team members of hearing. Voices in the fog, calling names of team members. Temporary GPS failure affecting all devices within a quarter-mile radius of the clearing. Recovery of a fragment of red fabric, confirmed kayak jacket, found in a crevice 50 feet above water level, with no footprints or climbing evidence leading to or from the location. The area has been marked for further geological and anthropological study. Allison Reeves's body was never recovered. Location: Gates of the Arctic National Park, Alaska. Date: March 12, 2017. They say memory is unreliable, that the human brain rewrites history every time you recall it, smoothing over rough edges and filling in gaps with fabrication. Wesley Thorne knew that was true. He'd studied it in his psychology courses at UAF, back when he thought he'd be a professor instead of a park ranger in the most remote wilderness on Earth. But there were some memories that didn't smooth over. Some memories that stayed sharp as broken glass, cutting you fresh every time you touched them. March 12th, 2017. 3 years to the day since Tyler Brennan disappeared. Wesley stood at the window of the Bettles Ranger Station, watching dawn break over the Brooks Range. The mountains rose like frozen teeth against a sky that held more darkness than light even at this hour. It was 42 degrees below zero, warm for mid-March in the Arctic. The kind of temperature where exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes, where your breath crystallizes instantly and falls as snow, where metal becomes brittle and engines refuse to turn over no matter how much you coax them. He held his coffee mug with both hands, more for the warmth than any desire to drink. The coffee itself had gone cold in the 3 minutes it took to walk from the break room to his office. Everything went cold here, eventually. Heat was a temporary condition, borrowed from combustion or electricity or the brief Arctic summer when the sun circled overhead for months without setting. But cold was permanent. Cold was the default state of existence this far north. Wesley's reflection stared back at him from the window. 43 years old, weathered face marked by 15 years of Alaska winters, gray threading through his beard despite his relative youth. The hair had started graying after Tyler disappeared. Stress, the doctor said. Trauma. Wesley knew better. Some things aged you from the inside out, wrote themselves into your DNA and made you older than your years. Behind him, the radio crackled with morning check-ins. Rangers at remote cabins reporting in, confirming they'd survived another night. Bush pilots filing flight plans. Weather stations broadcasting conditions across the North Slope. The routine sounds of wilderness management in a park larger than Belgium, but with a staff of 6 permanent rangers and maybe a dozen seasonal workers during the brief summer months. Gates of the Arctic National Park wasn't like other parks. There were no roads leading in, no visitor centers with gift shops, no established trails or campgrounds, just 8 million acres of mountains, tundra, and rivers that had looked exactly the same for 10,000 years. The park's motto was simple: the last great wilderness. It wasn't marketing, it was truth. Wesley set down his coffee and walked to the large map mounted on the wall, a topographical chart showing elevation lines so dense they bled together in places where mountains rose sheer and unforgiving. Red pins marked the handful of ranger cabins scattered across impossible distances. Blue pins showed emergency supply caches. And there, roughly 70 miles northwest of Bettles, a single black pin marked the last known position of Tyler Brennan's Piper Super Cub before it vanished on March 12, 2014. Morning, Wes. He turned to find Sarah Blackwood in the doorway, holding 2 fresh mugs of coffee. She was the newest ranger transferred up from Denali 6 months ago. Still had that optimistic enthusiasm that the Arctic hadn't ground down yet. Give it time, Wesley thought. Give it one full winter of darkness and cold that made you question whether you'd ever feel warm again. Morning, he replied, taking the offered mug gratefully. Sarah glanced at the map, at the black pin, then back to Wesley. 3 years today, she said quietly. You knew him well? We flew together a lot. Tyler was the best bush pilot in the Brooks Range. Could land on gravel bars I couldn't even see from the ground. Thread through mountain passes in weather that grounded everyone else. Wesley took a sip of coffee. He'd been flying these mountains for 20 years. Knew every valley, every landing strip, every wind pattern. That's why it never made sense. The disappearance? Wesley nodded. No distress call, no emergency locator beacon, no wreckage found despite 3 weeks of intensive searching. His flight plan said he was delivering supplies to a research team studying caribou migration near the Noatak River. Simple run, perfect weather. He just vanished. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, I heard stories from the Inupiat folks in Bettles. They said the area where Tyler disappeared has a name in their language, translated roughly as where the river bends wrong, or place that swallows travelers. They won't go there. I've heard those stories too. Wesley turned back to the window, watching the first direct sunlight touch the mountain peaks, turning snow to gold. Heard a lot of stories over the years. Every culture up here has them. Inupiat, Koyukon, Tlingit. Things that live in the spaces between mapped and unmapped. Things that take people. You believe them? Wesley didn't answer immediately. How could he explain what he'd seen 3 years ago? The things he'd witnessed during the search that made no sense, that violated every law of physics and reason? The official report listed Tyler Brennan as missing, presumed dead due to aviation incident. It didn't mention the impossible radio transmissions. The footprints that started in the middle of untouched snow. The way time itself seemed to bend and fracture in that place. I believe there are things in the wilderness we don't understand, he finally said. And I believe this park is bigger and stranger than any map can show. The radio on his desk crackled. Bettles Station, this is Research Cabin 7, morning check-in. Wesley walked over and picked up the handset. Copy Cabin 7, status? All good here. Temperature -38, winds calm, visibility unlimited. We're heading out to set up camera traps on the North Ridge. Copy that. Radio check at noon. Watch for overflow ice on Ula Creek. The geologist reported it's been unstable this week. Will do. Cabin 7 out. Wesley was about to set down the handset when the radio crackled again. Static, thick and strange, with an odd quality he couldn't quite place. Like the sound was coming from very far away, or very long ago. And then a voice. Bettles Station, this is Cub 879er. Do you copy? Wesley's hand froze on the handset. That call sign, 879er, Tyler's plane. Sarah must have seen something in his face because she moved closer, concern evident. Wes, what's wrong? The voice came again, clearer now. Bettles, this is 879er, I have an emergency. Engine's running rough, losing altitude. Current position approximately 60 miles northwest of Bettles, following the Noatak drainage. Bettles, do you copy? It was Tyler's voice. Exactly Tyler's voice. The slight Texas drawl he'd never lost despite 20 years in Alaska. The particular way he pronounced approximately, with emphasis on the middle syllable. Wesley had flown with Tyler dozens of times, heard him on the radio hundreds of times. He knew that voice as well as his own. But Tyler Brennan had been dead for 3 years. Wesley's mouth was dry. He pressed the transmit button. 879er, this is Bettles Station. Confirm your call sign and pilot identification. A pause. Static. Then, Bettles. This is Tyler Brennan in Piper Super Cub 879er. Jesus, Wes, is that you? I'm in trouble here. Engine just seized up completely. I'm going down. Sarah grabbed Wesley's arm. That's impossible. That's the missing pilot. That's... I know who it is, Wesley said quietly. Into the radio. Tyler, what is your current altitude and nearest landmark? I'm at about 2,000 feet AGL, descending fast. I can see a river, has to be the Noatak. There's a gravel bar ahead. I'm going to try to set her down. The sound of wind and struggling engine roared in the background. Wes, if I don't make this, tell Jenny The transmission cut to static. Tyler, do you copy? Wesley's voice was sharp now, professional instincts overriding the impossibility of the situation. 879er, respond. Nothing but static, and underneath it something else. A sound like water flowing, or voices whispering in a language Wesley didn't recognize. Sarah was staring at the radio like it was a snake that might strike. Wesley, that was real. I heard it too. But how? I don't know. He set down the handset with a hand that wanted to shake. 3 years ago, during the search, we got radio calls like this, 6 times over 2 weeks. Tyler's voice, always reporting the same emergency, always in slightly different locations. We investigated every transmission, followed every lead, never found anything except... He trailed off. Except what? Wesley walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder marked Brennan Tyler, Missing Person Case 2014. He opened it and spread several photographs across his desk. Aerial shots of pristine wilderness, mountains, rivers, snow-covered tundra. But in each photo, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, were marks in the snow. Not quite footprints, not quite anything identifiable. Just disturbances that formed patterns that hurt to look at too directly. We found these at 3 different locations where the radio transmissions seemed to originate. Different sites miles apart, but all showing the same marks. Wesley pointed to one photo. And here, at what we thought was Tyler's actual crash site. Except there was no wreckage, no debris field. Just these patterns in the snow and... He pulled out another photo. This one showed something that looked like otter tracks leading away from the disturbed snow. But the tracks were too large, too regularly spaced, and they transitioned halfway across the frame into something that might have been human footprints, or might have been something else entirely. The Tlingit elder in Bettel saw this photo, Wesley continued. Old man named James, must have been 90. He looked at it for maybe 5 seconds, then handed it back and said one word. Kushtaka, and then he walked away and wouldn't talk to me again. What's a kushtaka? Land otter man in English translation. But that doesn't really capture it. They're shapeshifters in Tlingit folklore, beings that can appear as humans or otters or something in between. They live at the edges of reality, in places where the world is thin. They imitate human voices perfectly, lure people away from safety. And once they take you... Wesley closed the folder. According to the stories, once they take you, you exist in their time, not ours. You're lost between moments, trapped in a space that doesn't follow normal rules. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then, you think that's what happened to Tyler? I think 3 years ago I would have said absolutely not. I think today, after hearing his voice again on the anniversary of his disappearance, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. The radio crackled again. Both of them jumped. Bettel station. This is 879er. Tyler's voice, but strained now, breathing hard. I managed to put her down on a gravel bar. The plane's intact, but the engine's toast. I'm approximately 65 miles northwest of your position. Wes, it's getting dark fast and the temperature's dropping. I need extraction. Wesley checked his watch. 7:42 a.m. It wouldn't be getting dark for another 12 hours. He picked up the handset. Tyler, what time do you have? A pause. Time? It's... Jesus, my watch stopped. The battery must be dead. But the sun's setting, so it's got to be around 1900 hours, right? Wesley and Sarah exchanged glances. Then Wesley asked very carefully, Tyler, what's the date? March 12th. Why? What year? A longer pause. When Tyler spoke again, his voice had changed. Confusion bled into fear. 2014, it's 2014. Wes, why are you asking me this? What's going on? Wesley's hand tightened on the handset. Tyler, listen to me carefully. I need you to look around. Describe exactly what you see. I'm on a gravel bar next to the river. The plane's behind me. She's banged up, but mostly okay. There's forest on both banks, mountains in the distance. And, Wes, this is strange. There's someone walking toward me, Down the river, I can see them maybe 100 yards away. Every instinct Wesley had honed over 15 years in the wilderness started screaming. Tyler, do not approach whoever that is. Do not interact with them. Get back in your plane and lock the doors. What? Wes, they might be able to help. Tyler! Wesley's voice was sharp enough that Sarah took a step back. Listen to me. Get in the plane now and lock the doors. Whatever you see walking toward you, it is not human, do you understand? Silence on the radio. Then, barely audible. Wes, I can hear them calling. They're calling my name. They sound like Jenny, my wife. How do they know her voice? Because that's what they do, Wesley said, feeling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. They imitate. They mimic. Tyler, you need to... Oh, God. Tyler's voice had gone high and thin. Oh, God, it's not one person. There's 6 of them. 7. They're coming from both sides now. They're walking on the water, Wes. They're walking on the goddamn river, and it's not even frozen. How are they... The transmission dissolved into static and screaming. Wesley was moving before he consciously decided to, grabbing his pack from the corner, checking his survival gear. Sarah caught his arm. Wesley, you can't go out there. That transmission could be from anywhere. It could be some kind of echo, some atmospheric phenomenon. I know where he is, Wesley interrupted. Or where he was. 3 years ago, we tracked the strongest transmission to a location on the No attack. We called off the search before investigating it fully because a storm moved in. That's where I'm going. You'll need a pilot. I have my private license. I can fly the park Cessna in 40 below weather to a location where a plane disappeared 3 years ago. Sarah shook her head. At least wait until... The radio crackled one more time. Wes, Tyler's voice barely a whisper now. They're wearing faces. Human faces, but wrong. Eyes like animals. They're offering to help me. They say they know the way home. They say time doesn't work the same way here, that I can still get back to Jenny, back to my life. All I have to do is follow them. Should I? Wes, should I follow them? Wesley grabbed the handset so hard his knuckles went white. No. Tyler, no matter what they promise, do not go with them. Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. But they say I'm already dead in your time. They say 3 years have passed. Is that true? Wes, is that true? How do you tell someone they've been dead for 3 years? How do you explain that time is fractured and they're calling from a moment that's simultaneously in the past and somehow still happening? Tyler, just hold on, I'm coming. I'm so cold, Wes, so cold, and they're warm. I can feel heat coming off them even from here. Maybe just for a minute. Maybe I could warm up. Tyler, don't... And then I'll wait for you. Just need to get warm. They're opening a door. There's a door in the air, Wes. It's warm inside. I can see light. I can see... The transmission ended. Not in static. Not in screaming. Just silence. Complete and absolute. As if someone had severed a connection that could never be restored. Wesley stood holding the dead handset for 10 seconds. 20. Then he set it down very carefully and turned to Sarah. Get Tom and Rachel. Tell them I need someone to monitor radio communications and someone to coordinate with search and rescue if I don't check in every hour. I'm taking the Cessna. If you don't hear from me by nightfall, contact the state troopers. Wesley, this is insane. You don't even know if that was real. It was real. He was loading his pack now, moving on autopilot. Survival gear, emergency beacon, rope, flares, the Glock 10mm he carried for bear protection. Not that it would do any good against what he suspected he'd find. I heard those transmissions 3 years ago and wrote them off as atmospheric phenomena, electromagnetic interference, radio echoes from the ionosphere. Whatever explanation made sense, but I knew. Deep down, I knew something was wrong about that place. He zipped the pack and shouldered it. Tyler Brennan was my friend. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's been dead for 3 years. But maybe, just maybe, he's trapped in some fold of time that I don't understand, still experiencing March 12, 2014, on an endless loop. And maybe he's been calling for help all this time, and I've been too afraid to answer. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. 1 hour check-ins. And Wesley? Be careful. Whatever's out there, it's been waiting for you. That's why the transmission came today. 3 years to the day. Wesley knew she was right. Knew this was a trap or an invitation or something he didn't have words for. But he also knew he was going. Had to go. Because Tyler's voice was still echoing in his head. I'm so cold, Wes. So cold. He'd been hearing that voice for 3 years in dreams. Maybe it was time to answer it. Look, Doug. The Cessna's engine had resisted starting, reluctant in the extreme cold. But after 3 attempts and some creative cursing, the propeller coughed to life. Wesley let it warm up for 10 minutes, running through his pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Weather was clear, visibility unlimited, winds calm, perfect flying conditions. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like the calm before something terrible. He took off from Bettles at 8:30 hours, the small plane climbing into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Below, the landscape spread out in endless white, the Brooks Range rising to the north, the vast plateau of the Arctic slope beyond, the frozen ribbon of the Koyukuk River winding through valleys that had never known roads or permanent human settlement. Wesley had flown over this country hundreds of times, had hiked through portions of it, camped in it, studied its geology and ecology and weather patterns. He knew it was just wilderness, rocks and ice and trees following the predictable patterns of nature. But sometimes, usually in winter when the darkness pressed in for 20 hours a day, and the cold made you question whether you'd ever feel your fingers again, he'd wonder if the Inupiat and Koyukon elders were right. If there were places where the world worked differently, places where the rules humans had mapped and measured and claimed to understand simply didn't apply. The radio crackled. Bettles to Cessna November 7-2 Charlie radio check. Copy, Bettles. I'm 20 minutes out from the target coordinates. Weather clear, all systems normal. Copy that, Wes. We'll be monitoring. A pause, then Sarah's voice. Still receiving the transmissions? Tyler's voice. He's been calling every 10 minutes. Same words each time. I'm following them. The door's warm. Tell Jenny I tried to get home. Wesley's hands tightened on the yoke. He went with them. Looks like it. Wesley, this feels wrong. Like we're hearing someone's last moments repeating. Maybe you should... I'm not turning back. See you in a few hours. November 7-2. Charlie out. He flew on through crystalline air, following the Noatak River as it carved through increasingly rugged terrain. The mountains rose on either side now, their peaks serrated and sharp, their slopes too steep for snow to cling. This was the heart of the Brooks Range, some of the most remote wilderness in North America. If you went down here, no one would find you. Your body would freeze solid in minutes, preserved until summer thaw exposed it to scavengers or erosion carried it away. Tyler would have known that. Tyler had flown these mountains for 20 years. So what had made him walk away from his plane? What had been so compelling about those figures on the river that he'd ignored every survival instinct? The answer came to Wesley with the cold certainty of absolute knowledge. Because they showed him a way home. Because they promised warmth in the cold. Because they wore faces he recognized and spoke in voices he trusted. And by the time he realized the deception, it was too late. The GPS coordinates were approaching, 67 miles northwest of Bettles, on a bend in the Noatak where the river doubled back on itself in a tight oxbow. Wesley descended, circling the area, looking for anything unusual, just river and gravel bars and dense forest. No plane, no wreckage, no sign that anything had ever been here except caribou and wolves and the patient accumulation of snow. But there, on the gravel bar at the apex of the oxbow, something glinted in the sunlight. Something metal. Wesley brought the Cessna lower, the landing gear almost brushing treetops as he made a pass over the gravel bar. And there it was. Tyler's Piper Super Cub. Intact. Undamaged. sitting exactly as it would if someone had simply landed it and walked away. Wesley's breath caught in his throat. The search 3 years ago had covered this area. They'd flown over this exact spot a dozen times. He'd personally walked this gravel bar with a search team, looking for any sign of Tyler or his plane. The plane hadn't been here then. It was here now. Wesley found a stretch of river bar half a mile downstream that looked solid enough for landing. The Cessna touched down rough. The gravel was uneven, frozen into ruts and ridges, but the landing gear held. He taxied to a stop, killed the engine, and sat in the sudden silence. This was insane. All of it. Planes didn't appear 3 years after they vanished. Radio transmissions didn't come from the past. And yet here he was, about to step out into negative 40-degree air to investigate something that violated every law of physics and reason. Wesley grabbed his pack, checked his GPS beacon was active, and opened the door. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Air so cold it burned lungs and flash froze the moisture in his nostrils. He pulled his fur-ruffed parka hood tight, ensuring no skin was exposed. At these temperatures, frostbite was measured in seconds, not minutes. He walked along the river bar, boots crunching on gravel and ice. His breath formed great clouds that crystallized and fell as tiny ice particles. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, no sound except his own movement. The Arctic in winter was the quietest place on Earth. Sound didn't carry in air this cold. It died a few feet from its source, absorbed and frozen. Tyler's plane sat in a small clearing where the gravel bar widened, its orange and white paint bright against the monochrome landscape. Wesley approached slowly, every sense alert. The plane's door was open. Hanging slightly ajar, snow drifted across the pilot's seat. He looked inside. Empty. But on the instrument panel, Tyler's logbook lay open. Wesley picked it up with gloved hands and read the last entry. March 12th, 2014. Departed Bettles 1430 hours. Supply run to No Attack Research Station. Weather clear. Engine began missing at 1645 hours. Forced landing on river bar at N67-42 W154 Diggy 18 EAN. Engine seized. Radio contact with Bettles established. West said help is coming. Getting dark. Temperature dropping, saw figures approaching, they offered help. Following them to shelter. Will return for plane when warm. TB. The handwriting was Tyler's. Wesley had seen it enough times to recognize the cramped lettering, the way Tyler always abbreviated temperature as temp. But the paper was fresh. The ink hadn't faded. It looked like it had been written minutes ago, not 3 years. Wesley set down the logbook and backed out of the plane. His radio crackled. November 7-2. Charlie, this is Bettles. We've lost your GPS signal. Repeat, we've lost your beacon. Please confirm your position. Wesley grabbed his radio. Bettles, I'm at the site. I found Tyler's plane. It's here. It's intact. He checked his GPS unit. The screen showed static, the satellite lock icon flickering and dying. Confirm beacon failure. My GPS has also malfunctioned. We'll proceed with visual navigation. Negative, Wes. Without GPS, we can't track you. Recommend immediate return to your aircraft and departure. Copy that. I just need to... He stopped. There were tracks in the snow leading away from the plane. Fresh tracks, or what looked fresh in the strange half-light of Arctic afternoon. Human-sized. Bare feet. In 40 below weather. Wesley followed the tracks with his eyes. They led toward the tree line where the spruce forest grew dark and dense. And there, just visible among the trees, was something that made his stomach turn. A door. Not a door to a building. Just a door. Standing free in the forest. A wooden frame with no walls attached, no structure around it. Through the doorway, Wesley could see more forest, but wrong somehow. The light different, the trees arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. And standing in the doorway was a figure. Human-shaped, but not quite human. The proportions were close, but not exact. Arms slightly too long, head slightly too large. It wore Tyler's face like a mask, the features correct, but the expression empty, like someone had learned to arrange the components of a human face, but not how to animate them. Wesley, it said in Tyler's voice, I've been waiting. Time is strange here. I've been waiting 3 years and 3 minutes and no time at all. It all happens at once. Wesley's hand dropped to the Glock on his hip, though he knew it was useless. What are you? We have many names. Kushtaka. Land otter men, the ones who walk between moments. The thing smiled with Tyler's mouth, but the expression was predatory. Alien. Tyler called for help. We helped. We always help. We showed him warmth when he was cold. We showed him the way home. Where is he? Where's Tyler? He's here. The thing gestured to itself. And here. It pointed to the door. And here. It touched the plane. He's in every moment of March 12, 2014, living it over and over, never getting home, never freezing to death, just existing in the space between heartbeats in the fold where time doubles back on itself. Wesley took a step forward, anger overriding fear. Let him go. The thing laughed, a sound like otter chirps and water rushing. Let him go? He chose to follow. He walked through the door. We can't force anyone. We can only offer warmth, safety, a way home. And if the way home leads somewhere else, well, it shrugged. That's the price of accepting help from strangers. More figures were emerging from the trees now. Dozens of them, all wearing human faces but moving wrong, their joints bending in directions human joints couldn't bend. Some wore furs and old-fashioned clothing, garments from different eras, different centuries. Others were naked, their skin the gray-brown of otter fur. We've been here a long time, the thing with Tyler's face said. Since before your people came. Since before names were invented. We live in the spaces your maps don't show, the places where one moment touches another. And we collect travelers. People who get lost. People who accept our help. They become part of the collection, part of the pattern. Wesley's radio crackled, not with Sarah's voice, but with Tyler's. And not just Tyler. Dozens of voices overlapping, all calling for help in different languages, different accents, different eras. Help me, I'm freezing. Engine's dead, need extraction. Following the lights, they say there's a village. So cold, just need to get warm. The voices piled on top of each other, a chorus of the lost and trapped. How many people had followed the Kushtaka through their impossible doors? How many were trapped in loops of time, living their last moments over and over? You can join them, the thing said. Or you can leave. We don't force. We never force. But if you leave, Tyler stays. He'll keep calling. Every March 12, you'll hear his voice. Every anniversary, you'll remember you could have saved him. Could I? Wesley challenged. Could I actually save him? Or would I just join him in whatever hell you've created? The thing tilted its head, considering. That's the question, isn't it? Maybe you could pull him back. Maybe if you walk through the door, find him in the fold, bring him home. Or maybe you'd just add another voice to the chorus. It smiled again, only one way to find out. Wesley looked at the door. Through it, he could see Tyler now. The real Tyler, not this mask-wearing thing. Tyler was walking through a forest that repeated itself, the same trees over and over in an impossible loop. He looked cold, confused, lost. Every few seconds he'd stop and look around as if forgetting where he was or where he was going. Then he'd keep walking, following figures that stayed just ahead of him, always out of reach. Wesley could walk through that door, could try to bring Tyler back. But he'd seen enough horror movies, read enough folklore, to know how these stories ended. The hero who crosses the threshold doesn't come back. Or if they do, they come back changed, broken. Part of them left behind in the space between moments. Time's up, the thing said. The door only stays open for so long. Decide. Save your friend or save yourself. Wesley looked at Tyler, looked at the door, looked at his plane waiting half a mile away, engine cold but functional, ready to carry him back to the world where time moved forward and maps made sense, and Tyler Brennan had been dead for 3 years. He pulled out his radio. Sarah, if you can hear this, mark these coordinates. Don't send anyone else here, don't investigate, just mark it as a no-fly zone and leave it alone. Static. What the fuck are you doing? Sarah's voice broke through, distant and distorted. Wesley, your signal's breaking up. Get out of there. There are things in the wilderness we don't understand, Wesley said, echoing his words from that morning. Places where the rules don't apply. This is one of them. Tyler's here, but not here. Past, but not past. I can see him, but I can't reach him. And if I try... He looked at the Kushtaka, at their predatory smiles and patient eyes. If I try, I won't be coming back. Then don't try. Sarah's voice was sharp with panic. Wesley, get in your plane and leave. Tyler's gone. He's been gone for 3 years. You can't save him. But Wesley was still looking at Tyler, trapped in his loop, forever cold, forever lost, forever following creatures that promised warmth, but delivered only an endless repetition of his worst moment. I'm sorry, Wesley said into the radio. Tell Jenny I'm sorry. Tell her Tyler tried to get home. He really did try. Wes, no. He set down the radio and took a step toward the door. The Kushtaka smiled, their expressions unified as if controlled by a single mind. Good choice, said the thing with Tyler's face. The brave ones always choose to try. That's why we like collecting them. The cowards run, but the brave ones... It gestured to the door. The brave ones feed the fold. Wesley took another step. The air around the door shimmered, reality bending and warping. He could see Tyler more clearly now, could see the moment of his crash, the moment of accepting help, the moment of realization that help was not what it seemed. All happening simultaneously, layered on top of each other, like images in a corrupt photograph. And then Wesley understood. He wasn't going to save Tyler. Tyler couldn't be saved. He'd made his choice 3 years ago when he walked through a door that shouldn't exist. But Wesley could choose differently, could turn around, could walk back to his plane and fly away and live with the knowledge that his friend was lost forever in a place where time ate itself. Or he could step through and add his voice to the chorus. Another warning, another ghost calling from the fold. Maybe someday someone would hear all their voices and finally understand. Don't follow the ones who offer help in the wilderness. Don't trust the figures that walk on water or speak in familiar voices. Don't go through doors that lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Wesley's boot touched the threshold. Wesley! The shout came from behind him, but not from his radio. An actual human voice, loud and close. Wesley spun. Sarah was there, 50 yards away, rifle raised. Behind her, 2 more rangers, Tom and Rachel, who should have been in Bettles. How had they gotten here so fast? The Kushtaka hissed, their human masks slipping to show something beneath. Something with too many teeth, too many angles, eyes that were dark and gleaming and wrong. Get away from the door, Sarah screamed. Wes, get away from it now! Wesley took a step back. The door shimmered, began to fade. Through it, he could see Tyler stop walking, turn, and look directly at him. Their eyes met across impossible space. Tyler's expression was one of infinite sadness and infinite understanding. And then Tyler spoke, his words reaching Wesley not through the air, but through the radio clipped to his belt, through time itself. Don't follow me, Wes. Tell Jenny I love her. Tell her I'm sorry and get the hell out of here. The door vanished. The Kushtaka shrieked, a sound like breaking ice and dying animals, and scattered into the trees, their forms dissolving into shadows and mist. In seconds, they were gone. The forest was empty. Normal. Just trees and snow and cold. Wesley stood swaying, not quite sure if his legs would support him. Sarah and the others ran up, Sarah grabbing his arm. What were you thinking? She demanded. You were about to walk through? I don't even know what that was. Some kind of portal? Wesley, we saw it from the air. Saw you standing in front of it. Tom put this thing down on the river bar so fast I thought we were going to crash. How? Wesley's voice came out hoarse. How did you know? Tyler's transmission, Tom said, his face pale. After you went silent, we kept receiving it, but it changed. He stopped calling for help and started warning us. Said his friend was in danger, said we needed to get to you before you did something stupid. He looked around at the empty forest. What the hell was this place? What were those things? Wesley didn't answer immediately. He looked at where the door had been, at the tracks in the snow that were already filling with fresh powder, at Tyler's plane sitting abandoned on the gravel bar. Kushtaka, he finally said. Land otter men. They collect people in places where time folds. Tyler walked into their trap 3 years ago. I almost walked into it today. And the plane? Rachel asked. That's really Tyler Brennan's aircraft? It is. Or it was. Or it will be. Time doesn't work right here. Wesley pulled out his camera and took photos of the plane, the tracks, the spot where the door had been. Document everything. Then we're sealing this area. No one comes here. Ever. They worked quickly, efficiently, years of wilderness training overriding the existential horror of what they'd witnessed. Photos, GPS coordinates. The units worked now, as if the malfunction had never happened. Measurements. Wesley even checked inside Tyler's plane one more time, retrieved the logbook. As they were finishing, the radio crackled one last time. Wes, Tyler's voice clear and calm. Thank you for trying. Thank you for not following. Take care of Jenny. Tell her I saw the light. Tell her it was beautiful. Tell her I'm not cold anymore. Then silence. Final and absolute. They flew back to Bettles as the sun touched the horizon, the long Arctic twilight turning the landscape to shades of purple and blue. No one spoke during the flight. What was there to say? They'd witnessed something impossible, something that violated every law of nature and reason, and they'd never be able to prove it, never be able to explain it, never be able to make anyone understand. The official report would be simple. Located aircraft belonging to Tyler Brennan, missing since March 12, 2014. No sign of pilot. Area shows unusual characteristics consistent with local reports of geographic anomalies. Recommend permanent closure to public access. What the report wouldn't mention, the door that led nowhere, the creatures that wore human faces, the way time folded back on itself in that place, trapping Tyler in an endless loop of his last moments. The fact that he was still there, probably would always be there, living March 12, 2014, forever. Wesley wrote the report that night, sitting in his office as the temperature dropped to -50 outside, and the northern lights danced green and purple across the sky. When he finished, he pulled out a piece of personal letterhead and wrote a second letter, this one to Jenny Brennan in Anchorage. Dear Jenny, I found Tyler. Not his body, not in any way that will give you closure or answers, but I found him. He wanted me to tell you he tried to get home, he tried so hard. And he wanted you to know he saw something beautiful at the end, that he's not cold anymore. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't explain anything. But it's all I have to give you. I'm sorry. Wesley. He sealed the letter and set it aside to mail in the morning. Then he sat in the dark office, listening to the building creak in the cold, and waited for dawn. 3 years later, on March 12, 2020, Wesley received a package at the Bettles Ranger Station. No return address. Inside was a photograph, old, the colors slightly faded. It showed a man standing next to a Piper Super Cub smiling at the camera. Tyler Brennan, young and alive before the wilderness took him. On the back, written in handwriting that might have been Tyler's but might have been something else, was a single sentence. Time is a circle. See you next March 12th. Wesley burned the photograph that night, burned it and scattered the ashes over the frozen river, and tried not to think about the fact that somewhere, in a fold between moments, Tyler was still walking through an endless forest, still following figures that promised warmth, still trying to find his way home. And that one day, on some future March 12th, Wesley might hear his voice again. The wilderness keeps its secrets, and sometimes those secrets keep calling.